Hey, this is John Thorne. My new book is The Essential Wrapped in Plastic, Pathways to Twin Peaks. You can order it on Amazon, where you can find it in hard copy and is a Kindle version.
I got idea, man. You take me for a walk.
And welcome to this week's edition of Twin Peaks Unwrapped. I'm your host, Bryon and Halskov. Beside me, as always,
Ben Durant.
Hello, Ben.
Hey, Bryon. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic.
Wow. Well, looks like we're talking some more about Fire Walk with Me here.
The Fire Walk with Me trilogy continues.
Part 2.
Part 2 of the Fire Walk with Me trilogy. This week, we're going to have friends of the podcast come on, and we're going to hear what they think about Fire Walk with Me.
Awesome.
So, for me, this is truly exciting because last week, I really, let everything out.
Yes.
That I was holding in after seeing the film. I got to hear one theory. Yeah. You're going to hear John Thorne, and you're going to be like, wow. And I'm wowed by it. And I don't totally agree with it, but I'm very wowed by it.
It's a good theory.
I think this is going to be an awesome show because you'll learn a lot.
Awesome. Let's get going on it.
All right.
All right, we're here with John Thorne, author of Essential Wrapped in Plastic.
The theory is, very simply, is that the first 30 minutes, the entire, what I call Deer Meadow prologue, from the time the television gets smashed to the time we see the Twin Peaks sign and the music plays, that 30 minutes, that entire sequence, is Dale Cooper's dream. Let me just say that I watched Fire Walk with Me when it premiered, and I watched it over and over again over many, many years, and I was always somewhat uncomfortable with the film because there was a lot of stuff in there that I had a hard time reconciling and I had a hard time making sense of, and felt that Lynch was very deliberate, that he did things on purpose. And so there were things that I look at and said, well, they were purposeful, but I can't find any meaning in them. They don't connect to anything we've seen in the series before. And you would think he'd be aware of trying to connect to the series to some extent or not contradict the series, nor do they necessarily connect to the rest of the film. They just sort of stand alone. People dismissed the Deer Meadow prologue when the film first came out many times. Some people called it unnecessary, just tagged on there. I think Roger Ebert is famous for saying the film basically restarts at the half-hour mark. And again, I don't believe that's true because Lynch wouldn't do something like that. So, okay, thinking about the film for so long, and then having seen Mulholland Drive and seeing what he did with Mulholland Drive when he turned what was supposed to be a pilot for a television series into a standalone film, and seeing what Lynch has done in his other works, I started to rethink the idea that maybe that sequence is a dream. And the more I thought about it, the more sense it made to me, the more evidence that seemed to support that. I think it balanced the film in a way it hadn't been balanced before because it makes Dale Cooper, if you consider him a presence throughout that, he becomes more resonant, he becomes more connected to Laura Palmer. But the critical thing to remember is that all of that Deer Meadow sequence was scripted for Cooper initially anyway. They expected Kyle MacLachlan to portray Cooper throughout that, to play the part that Chet Desmond, Chris Isaak plays. Kyle MacLachlan pulled out. Lynch was left in a quandary. He had to find something. They recast the character, but they left most of the dialogue the same, and that's not what Lynch had intended when he scripted the film. He intended Cooper to be there. He intended Cooper to be there for a reason. So I believe he found a way, maybe just in his own mind, maybe it's just in my own mind. He found a way, if you think of it as a dream, to keep Cooper prominent in that as he wanted him to be from the beginning. A lot of people don't like it because they think, and I was talking to David Bushman at the Great Southern and ScottRyan, both of whom do not agree with it. And I think one of the things that I saw, when they were talking about it is some people think when I say that the entire Deer Meadow prologue is a dream, is that it didn't happen. Is that Cooper dreamed the death of Teresa Banks, that it never happened, that he dreamed that it, and this was all just in his head. And that is not what my theory is. My theory is that he did go and investigate Teresa Banks and failed at finding out who her killer was, and he relived that investigation in a dream. That's a critical part. I left it out earlier. It really is important to say that it did happen in real life, But what we're seeing is his dream version of those real events. Now, whether Chet Desmond is a real character or not, a real agent that Cooper knows, I don't know. Chet Desmond is either A, a real agent that Cooper dreamed thinking he'd be better suited to solving this, so I'll dream that, or Chet Desmond is simply a figment of Cooper's imagination. He recreated himself as someone else in hopes of solving a case he couldn't solve.
So what is the evidence?
There's lots of things, but I think the biggest piece of evidence is really not in the film, and that's unfair. But the biggest piece of evidence is that, again, and I said it once, let's just say it once again, that Lynch scripted that to be a Cooper story. It was very important to him. Cooper and Laura Palmer are the two most important characters. He wanted them to be dominant in that film, and he wanted to connect them. He wanted Cooper to, in that first half hour, get a significant connection to Laura Palmer. The way the film, if you read it literally the way it is now, the way it is on the surface, is that Chet Desmond goes and does all this work that we assumed that Cooper did, but now it's Chet Desmond under the direction of Gordon Cole. He goes and investigates the stuff. He finds some weird stuff out, and then he quote unquote disappears. And then Cooper in the film is really only left to go on this fruitless, almost passive visit to Deer Meadow and really just stand there. Does Cooper do anything else but stand there? And he talks to Carl Rod. He goes over and he looks at
Goes the opposite direction of where Carl tells him to go.
He doesn't do much, and he just leaves a message to Diane like, I have no idea. Well, that's that part. Earlier, of course, we have Cooper coming in and talking to Gordon Cole and seeing Philip Jeffries come into the room. So those are very important parts of that story. But Cooper's mission is to go find out what happened to Chet Desmond, whom we as an audience have just been introduced to. He goes. He doesn't find anything out. The movie never, ever mentions Chet Desmond again. The series never mentioned Chet Desmond. Now, again, I understand that the film came after the series in terms of how it was made. But you would think that if Lynch was introducing such a significant character and these significant events, that he would be aware that he was kind of rupturing continuity and the fact that they had never been referenced before. So all of that, I do think there's evidence in the film itself that can help you find that interpretation. For one thing, there's a lot of repetition in the Deer Meadow prologue. A lot of things lines are repeated twice. And for example, little things that seem insignificant. Gordon Cole at the beginning has two secretaries walk in and give him a cup of coffee. Or I don't know why, but there's two. Lines are repeated, again, more than once. We sure could use a good wake me up.
We sure do need a good wake me up, don't we, Agent Desmond? We sure do need a good wake me up, don't we, Agent?
Patron at the diner who says something twice.
Are you talking about that little girl that got murdered?
You got something to tell us?
I know shit from Shinola. Are you talking about that little girl that got murdered?
So there's repetition, which makes you think, this happened once before, maybe it's happening again. And then, of course, you've got the first line that Cooper says is, I'm worried about that dream I told you about.
I was worried about today because of the dream I told you about.
You immediately, clued in something about dreams. What dream? We never find out, if you're reading it just on the surface, what dream is he talking about? It seems very important. He's telling Gordon Cole, I'm worried about that dream. Okay. By the way, that line was not scripted in the original script. It was added later. And then, of course, Philip Jeffries comes in and says,
And this dream, we live inside a dream.
We live inside a dream. So I think I took that very literal. So maybe they are living inside a dream. One of my favorite things is the "Wake Me Up" line. Again, the Cooper dialogue was practically kept exactly the same for Chet Desmond, except in a few cases. So in the original script, Cooper's in the trailer, and he gets a cup of coffee. And Sam Stanley says, we sure do like our coffee, don't we, Agent Cooper? And Cooper looks at him, and then Sam Stanley says, we sure do love our coffee, don't we, Agent? Well, Cooper, so why did they change that line? That line was a good line. It left all the other lines the same for the most part. And yet they change it, and they change it to, we sure could use a good wake me up, couldn't we? And then Desmond just looks at him blankly. And Stanley says again, we sure could use a good wake me up, as if he's trying to wake him up, trying to wake up Cooper. And it's at that moment weird things happen. Suddenly Carl Rod goes into a trance. I just want to stay here. I've been places. Yeah. The weird old lady comes in. You know, she comes up the step. There's a shift in point of view. The camera zooms in. Energies are in motion during this wake me up line. Maybe I'm just having too much fun and reading too much into it, but it just is an odd line that they deliberately changed when they changed the character, whereas they kept most of the other lines the same.
I always saw from day one when I saw it in 92, Fire Walk with Me, the whole thing where Cooper goes to Gordon Cole and said, I had this dream. I thought he was reenacting his dream. Like, I thought it was almost like
when he goes to the monitors and sees himself. Yes,
yeah, I just thought it was like the throwing the rock at the bottle. I thought, okay, he had a technique that he did. He learned from a dream, and now he's seen Gordon, and he's going to reenact that technique.
Yes.
But even though it was a bad dream, right? You're saying
he's worried about it.
Worried about it, right?
You're absolutely right, and that's what I always thought that meant. He talks about the dream, and then he immediately goes and the monitor thing happens, and there's in a sense, by the way, of doubling. There are two Coopers in there, and that's another thing. The other thing that happens that I think is important to talk about is Albert. Albert in the series is a very, very down-to-earth, forensic individual who does not believe in the supernatural, and he has lines to that effect. If anyone's seen Bob and the Planet Earth lately, and he's got some other things. He doesn't have time for supernatural stuff. And in the original script, Albert is in the room when Philip Jeffries comes in, and they send him out of the room for some reason. So they deliberately script to get him out of the room, and then Jeffries disappears. But in the filmed version, Albert is in the room when Jeffries disappears. And so you try to reconcile that Albert with the Albert of the series. How could Albert be in a room where somebody literally vanishes and be the Albert we know in the series? Again, they had a way to get him out of the room. They were thinking that way when they scripted it. They didn't bother in this version.
I thought you were going to mention how Albert seems to be going along with Cooper saying, there's this girl who's doing drugs, and she's
now that part is not part of the dream.
Oh, you're right.
That part is that part is an Agent Cooper scene that takes place once the Twin Peaks sign appears, and we get into the Laura Palmer storyline. I contend that is not dream material, and we do see Cooper in Philadelphia talking to Albert about Laura Palmer, and he says in that sequence, lately I've been filled with the knowledge, or the knowledge has come to me. I think it was because he had a dream, but and I believe that is a real world Cooper.
Oh man,
I gotta ask you. So Bryan, you're new to Fire Walk with Me for the most part.
Yes.
Suddenly you hear something like that. You're not gonna hurt my feelings if you say, you're crazy, get out of here, because many people have. But I just wonder, suddenly being hit with that. What do you? How do you react to it?
It's like, at first I wanted to say, like, it's an interesting theory, but then I hear it and I'm like, what you say does make sense. It makes sense. Like, you make good points about everything, about the dialogue being said twice. I noticed that when they're in the trailer park, and he says it, and then Keith Sutherland's like, "What'd you say?" And then he has to repeat himself. He's almost choking on his coffee when he says it, too. I thought that was like a flub, but I didn't notice the dialogue being said twice. And I thought that part was like, he genuinely didn't hear the line.
Yeah, okay. And that could be. That could be just an idiosyncratic aspect of that character, and Lynch likes that, and that honestly that could be what it is.
But the whole wake up thing, and it is a great theory. Like, it does kind of make sense, because the dream. Now, why would the dream is never brought up? I mean, the dream is never talked about. Cooper's dream. What is he talking about? And okay, if we go into that theory of it being a dream, which can be explored, because if Cooper did this, failed.
Right.
Someone who has a heavy conscience and has already had something bad happen to him and would want anything
Exactly.
to save someone, in their dream, it could be making himself better to do that mystery, to get that mystery.
And I contend that, yes, he is dreaming it because he's frustrated that he failed, so he's dreaming it to... and again, it's important to remember this dream, it's a dream, but it's also the second time through for Cooper. That's why there's repetition, I believe.
Yeah.
But also, if it is a dream, then the dream has to have some important function in the narrative. And I also believe that because of the dream, that Cooper is made aware of these Red Room, Black Lodge forces that he has never been aware of before. And so Philip Jeffries comes in and says, I've been to one of their meetings, it was a convenience store, and the ring, and you see all these, this sort of crash of imagery of strange things that are happening. I believe if it's a dream that Cooper is actually receiving that imagery, that he's suddenly made aware of stuff that he did not know about before.
Thank you, Carl. Sorry to wake you.
All right. I'm having a bad dream anyway.
And when he's with Carl Rod, he sees the Let's Rock.
Yes.
And so that's interesting, right? I've always, before I had this theory, I just thought, well, Cooper saw Let's Rock written on the windshield. Wouldn't he think that's funny when the little man said Let's Rock? Would he have remembered that? And then I thought, well, no, maybe that was some sort of communication from the Red Room in a dream. He's getting a connection. Cooper, of course, says, I became aware of the plight of Tibetan people through a powerful dream I once had.
And he's had, so he has had a history of dreams.
Indeed. And getting insight into things.
Yeah,
so,
and like my theory about the Red Rooming just existing with no time, Let's Rock, is that Red Room reaching out to him because he would exist in that world always. Like, I just say he would always exist. I think he exists from once you're in there, no matter which way you go into it. The way I see it, there's no time. So Let's Rock could it be a sign? Could it be
it could be some echo of time, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. And again, go back to two big things. Go back to what was Lynch's intent. Lynch is very interested in characters more than anything else. I think Firewalk with Me is certainly about the character of Laura Palmer, but also has to be about the character of Dale Cooper, and he wanted Dale Cooper to be an important character. He's interested in character. He kept Cooper as an important character. And when Lynch is oftentimes faced with a dilemma, when something changes on him, Mulholland Drive's a great example, he reworks what he has as a dream.
Yeah.
He did that in Mulholland Drive.
When you really think about it, it does kind of make some sense.
For me, it makes the film cohesive, and it makes it balanced, and it seems to sort of, achieve that balance with that theory in mind. Now, a lot of people don't like that theory. And, there's Twin Peaks fans were real, fervent about their love of Twin Peaks. And I think when I proposed this theory, they were first thinking I was saying, you have to think of it this way, which you don't. You can think of it any way you want. Yeah. And a lot of people love the character of Chet Desmond, and they were afraid that, this theory erases Chet Desmond from, the continuity. It doesn't have to necessarily. It wasn't my intent to take anything away from anybody. Yeah. And I'll be the first to admit this theory could be completely wrong. And we may find out in the first 5 minutes of the new series that this theory is completely wrong. I'll be the first to say I was completely wrong, but for the material I had at hand, in a film that was very confusing and I struggled with for a long time, this was the theory that worked for me. If new evidence comes along that allows for a different, better theory, I'll be the first to embrace it. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
When I first came up with this idea, I was struggling with it because I hadn't totally thought it through, but I felt very confident that there was a dream element going on. And I thought it was just the Chet Desmond part that was a dream. And I was working with that for a while. And I got on the phone with Craig, and I said, Craig Miller, who did Wrapped in Plastic with me, and I said, this is where I'm going, and this is something I think is opening some doors for me, and I feel like there's a momentum building, but it doesn't quite work for me, and I'm bouncing ideas off of Craig. he didn't understand. That's fine. He didn't get what I was saying. He goes, wait a minute, are you saying the whole 30 minutes is a dream? And I said, no, wait a minute. So I got to give Craig credit because he didn't understand what I was saying. He just sort of suggested, am I saying it's the whole 30 minutes? And when he put that thought in my head, I was like, yeah, you know what? Yes, it's the whole 30 minutes. It's not just that one part.
Yeah.
Why not? It's funny when it ends. Cooper's, I contend that the dream ends when Cooper's talking to Diane and he says, the killer will strike again, but who knows when or when. And he turns it out. And then it's the Twin Peaks sign. It's the opening credits to it's the opening credit music to Twin Peaks.
An odd thing
as
to have
if
there.
We're waking up and the story is starting. I did write another short essay. It's in the appendix of my book about the song references that are in the Deer Meadow prologue. There's 2 song references. One of them is Goodnight Irene, when they're in Hap's Diner and they're talking to one guy's fixing the light and they're talking to the manager of the diner.
Yeah.
And
Metallica guy? I think it's Metallica guy.
And he says to them, he wants them to go talk to Irene, the waitress outside, and he says, now it is night and her name is Irene. There's nothing good about it, which of course is to make us aware of the song title Goodnight Irene. So I looked up the lyrics to Goodnight Irene and they say, Goodnight Irene, I'll see you in my dreams.
Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dreams.
The Who Knows Where or When song that is the very end, he says, as the old song goes, who knows where or when. I looked at the lyrics to that as well, and I'm going to get them wrong, but there's something to the effect of things we've thought we've lived before, we're here to live again. Oh, the tricks your mind can play. Who knows where or when.
When you're awake, the things you think come from the dreams you dream. Thought has wings and lots of things are seldom what they seem. Sometimes you think you've lived before all that you live today. Things you do come back to you as though they knew the way. Oh, the tricks your mind can play. It seems we stood and talked like this before. We looked at each other in the same way then, but I can't remember where or when.
Now, they could just be coincidental. A complete accident. We can find meaning in anything, right? I can see something in a tortilla, right? Oh, look, it's a religious symbol. So, but it's strange that those 2 songs are there with lyrics that deliberately talk about dreams, circularity, repetition, and the tricks of your mind. The Goodnight Irene scene is interesting because the film is super long and he's having to cut it down. He's taking pieces out. We know he's cutting out scenes we'd all love to have seen.
Yeah.
That scene with the diner manager and the Goodnight Irene was a much longer scene. It was scripted, and I think it was probably shot that way. And it takes place in the middle of the diner. We never see Chet Desmond and Sam Stanley walk through the diner and go back to talk to this guy. We start right there in that room in the middle of the diner, which it seems to me almost like dream logic. Boom, we're in this room.
Yeah.
We get that one line about Goodnight Irene. He cuts the rest of the scene, but not the whole scene. Then they come out of the middle of the diner to talk to Irene. Again, it's like, why did Lynch keep that little piece? It could be, someone suggested to me today, because it's that cool electric sound and effect and lighting, and he loved it. I buy that. Sure, he loved that. He kept it just for that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yet it was a film that he had to edit down. He had an extended scene that he cut. He could have cut the whole thing out because nothing that they get in that scene advances the plot, tells us anything about character, but it's there. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dreams. There's a lot more evidence I use to support this theory of not only why we can see it as a dream, but why it also works as a dream in the overall film. But, you know, again, a lot of my basis is comparing original script. There's two different scripts. There's a first draft and then there's a later draft. First draft has Cooper in it. And if you look at the way things change from this one script to the next script to the way the film was actually edited, you see these changes that are obviously being made. And that's not unusual for Lynch. He makes changes on the fly. He likes to explore. He sees something he hadn't thought of. And so we all know that that's going to happen anyway. But boy, when they made those changes to add Chet Desmond in, they added some things that were never there. The Blue Rose is a great example. You would think we would know what a Blue Rose case is. You would think that Lynch is, when he's introducing a Blue Rose case, it's significant. Why have we never heard about it before? Again, I know the film was made after the series, so there was no way for the series to incorporate it. But Lynch knew what was in the series and what wasn't in the series. And when he's introducing the Blue Rose, isn't he thinking, wow, you know, this is going to really confuse people because we've never talked about it before? Unless you think, as I say, the Blue Rose is simply an artifact of a dreaming mind, that the Blue Rose represents the impossibility of this case to Cooper. And it's not in the Cooper script. There is no Blue Rose.
Wow.
But when Chet Desmond comes in, now there's a Blue Rose.
Her name is Lil. She's my mother's sister's girl.
Which would make her his cousin?
Right.
And then we have the dream sequence in the second episode.
Right.
She's my cousin.
Yes.
Okay.
And then Lil,
I know
Lil is short for little man, like, you know, like they have Lil, and she's
beautiful.
dancing.
Had never thought of that before. Thank you, Ben. I'm going to put that in the next version of the
I want to say that I can't take credit because I think probably VideoWatchdog probably in one of their essays probably came up with this. But really, her dancing in plays where she's standing in place doing this thing that is like
it's so outlandish.
Yeah.
It's so otherworldly, and yet, and you know, there are otherworldly parts in the rest of the film, for sure, but it is more grounded in this sort of gritty, tragic story of Laura Palmer. And then that Dear Meadow sequence, though, there's just so many oddities that don't seem like they could, you know, exist in a waking world.
Right.
It's a cool 30 minutes, no matter how you look at it. It was always my favorite part of the film. Always. And but I just thought it had to integrate somehow. A lot of people are happy in many ways to think it's this and then it's this. That's fine too. Yeah. That's one quick mention of, you know, Lynch has depicted many, many dreams. He depicts another dream in Fire Walk with Me. But in other films he's done this. Razorhead's a good example where a character seems to be dreaming and then they wake up from their dream. But they're still dreaming. And so Cooper walks in and says, I'm worried about that dream I had last night. It seems as if he just woke up from a dream. But we've seen Lynch show us many, many times that just because it looks like they woke up, they not necessarily, right? So Laura wakes up in her bed in Fire Walk with Me, but she's still dreaming.
Yeah.
And Henry wakes up in Eraserhead, and you think that weird dream is over, but then he wakes up again later. And you could say, well, he was still dreaming.
And Bryon and I were recently watching The Missing Pieces, and we're watching the scene with Annie in the hospital, and I didn't realize she's still sleeping. And the nurse steals the ring, and she's saying, you know, write it in your diary. And I think forever, and I thought I saw it in the script, I always thought she was talking to the nurse, saying write it in your diary to the nurse. But at least in that scene, it looks like she might still be sleeping, and maybe when she's still sleeping, she's actually talking to Laura at the same time. At the same time she's in the hospital, she's also with Laura.
Yeah.
And that's all a dream. And it's I mean, at the same time when she's with Laura, she's wearing Caroline's dress, which would be in the Black Lodge red room, and like,
it's all great, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
great.
all great. But it's like, is she dreaming? Is she still in the red room?
Is Annie dreaming?
Yes.
That's fascinating. And I must say, with The Missing Pieces, all of which are wonderful, important pieces, I try not to use any of them to support because he cut them out. And I'm saying this is the film he wanted. It's self-contained. It's this many minutes long. That's all we can use. Granted, I've used scripts as well, but they are the film. They're the film that he was trying to make. But anything that he cut out for a reason. and so I don't use that as evidence. And yet you're making me think how great the idea is that Laura's dream of Annie is also Annie's dream of Laura. That's beautiful. That's a great thing.
With the monitors, what was he trying to accomplish there?
See, I never could make a good explanation for it. I struggled with it for a long time. But if it's a dream, he's doubled. It's a doubling of him. It's his mentality saying, I'm no longer Chet Desmond. Chet Desmond is gone.
That's where I want to go.
And it's an very fascinating. Watch Cooper run out after Philip Jeffries walks by. The Cooper in the corridor. Cooper sees it on the monitor. He runs out to follow Jeffries. But he stops for a split second in that spot where he was. It's almost just like he's reconnecting with that invisible double. He stops and then he continues.
That was my with the whole dream theory was he trying to see himself if he looked like Chet Desmond? Like, is he going back and forth? What do I look like? Do I look like Chet
I never
Desmond?
thought about. I love that.
Yeah.
What is he trying to define? Who am I? I'm worried. And it could be
because it was weird. I'm like, why is he? Is he trying to catch up with himself? Is he trying to see himself? What is he doing?
Yes, that's great. I never thought about it quite in those terms, but I really like that idea of him not quite sure whose identity is. At that point.
If he's in a dream, Chet Desmond would be his opposite.
He was just Chet Desmond, and now he's got to find himself as Cooper again. Maybe. Great stuff. I love that.
Established that there was already a problem with the
security monitors. I think they do.
Let's get what you guys are talking about. I've always assumed that like when he comes in and there's David Bowie, Agent Jeffries, he says, "Who? Do you know who this is? Do you know who this is?" He's talking about Bob. And he's talking about like
for years. That's all I thought it could possibly be.
Right, and then to be able to do this whole where all of a sudden there's two of them. There's him and he sees himself in the monitor. All of a sudden there's your doppelganger. There's your double.
I mean, the answer to that question, who do you think that is there? Almost everyone will say they're probably he's referencing Bob, and yet I go out on a limb here. There's really not a lot of evidence that he may be saying that that's Chet Desmond or that's the dreamer. He quickly says soon after that, we live inside a dream, and this is the dreamer. Or Cooper has just been manifesting as Chet Desmond and now has kind of returned to the Cooper and again pointing, who do you think that is there? Not asking us to necessarily answer it definitively, who do you think that is there? But who do you think that is there? We can't figure it out. We don't know who that is there because he's not sure himself right now. These are thoughts I'm having right now as I say this. So there's so many strange, fascinating pieces of the first 30 minutes. They're very tough to reconcile. And so this is just an effort to try to kind of, even the pages, take the papers and just even them all out and make it work.
Well, thank you, John. I mean, thank you for your time. I mean, I think we've been wanting for months to have you on to talk about this, but we had to get to Firewalk with Me before we could talk about it. So it's so exciting.
That was awesome.
People listening to this want more. I really recommend The Essential Wrapped in Plastic book that you've done with this essay. I mean, there's so many more essays just than this.
They're not all that crazy. If you hate that essay, the book still has cool stuff in it. Don't reject it for my...
I don't think and the Laura Palmer, I mean, JoelBocko loves the Laura Palmer essay, and I think that a lot of people like that. And then there's, of course, the interviews in this book that are just amazing that you got back when you were doing Wrapped in Plastic magazine. So thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
The letter that was extracted from beneath the fingernail of Teresa Banks gives me the feeling that the killer will strike again. But like the song goes, who knows where or when?
So, Andreas, we should talk some Firewalk with Me. In Denmark, how did it do?
Oh, well, I think a lot of people went to see it in the cinema. I mean, I did as well. I saw it two times in the movie theater, and it was kind of early for me, being that I'm from 1981. So it's like, I suppose, 12 years or something like it when it came to Denmark. In Denmark, I think in the early stages of 93 or the late stages of 92 or something like that.
Right.
And we all know that it was booted con and all that stuff, something that also happened to Antonioni's L'Avventura. So that doesn't necessarily say anything about the qualities of a given film. But if you look at I suppose, I'm not sure that the box office numbers, although I don't know how well it did in the cinemas in Denmark, I'm not sure they were that bad, really. There was quite a big hype around Twin Peaks. There were a lot of different viewings of Twin Peaks were arranged, so a lot of acolytes and, fans of Twin Peaks came to see Fire Walk with Me, but I suppose many of them were kind of disappointed with the film, and at least in terms of the critical reception, it didn't go well. I mean, I've sifted through all of the reviews that were done in Denmark as part of my book, The Art of Paradox. I've looked at the reception in Denmark of all the different David Lynch films. And it was, overall very bad, the reception of Fire Walk with Me. I think one pretty renowned Danish reviewer, today he isn't really that much of a reviewer anymore, but he wasn't his name, called it a travesty. And so that was one of them, right? And one of them quoted Vince Canby's almost famous notion, saying that it certainly looked like the worst movie ever made.
Wow.
And then sort of the most positive review that I've been able to find from back then, I mean, not a more recent review, but an actual review from the time when it came to Denmark, was by a guy called Bo Gren Jensen, who said that this was a mediocre film.
Wow.
That was sort of the most positive. He went full Monty, saying that, it might be semi-good, this film. So that was sort of the most positive review that I've been able to stumble upon from that period, and I've sifted through all of the reviews that were published in Danish journals and newspapers back then. They were all pretty negative and harsh, really.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that the harshest ones were quite as harsh as they were in the States, but I mean, it's taken quite a long time for people to critically accept the film, or to sort of reevaluate the film, or give it sort of a reappraisal. I think it has deserved that for many years, and certainly by now people are starting to accept it and embrace that it does. Still, though, some people argue that it's kind of disjunctive. It's not necessarily a homogeneous film, but it has qualities that are still we can't really avoid. We must acknowledge that it has certain visual and sonic qualities, and the psychological portrayal of Laura Palmer by Cheryl Lee, and of course also stylistically, the way that, almost expressionistically, the way the movie mirrors her sort of descent into Hades. It has qualities that we must recognize. I think people are sort of coming to that conclusion today, some more positively than others, but back then it seemed many people also in Denmark, at least the reviewers, were sort of hoping for a more traditional continuation of Twin Peaks in a way, although not a continuation, but sort of something that was more in direct line with what they'd seen on the show. Sure. And that opening shot of the television set being smashed by the blunt object is sort of almost a metaphorical way of saying to us that this will not be what you watched on television, whether you watched it on ABC or you watched it on the Danish Broadcasting Corporation, as we did in Denmark. This would be something else. And
that's true.
I think that was kind of difficult for some people to swallow.
Yeah. What is your thoughts on it?
I fell in love with Twin Peaks. That was my real introduction to David Lynch, and then together with a couple other geeky friends, and I'm from a small Danish town, sort of a bucolic highway, really. So we didn't have that many possibilities in terms of art house cinema, but we could borrow video cassettes from the library and stuff like that of Ryan and Fassbinder films and stuff like that, and we borrowed Eraserhead and The Elephant Man and Blue Velvet directly after watching Twin Peaks. Mind you, I was 10 years old back then. So then I watched Eraserhead Blue Velvet and The Elephant Man, and I was kind of taken aback by all of those movies. And then I watched Fire Walk With Me afterwards, and I liked it quite a lot. I remember my friend, who's normally I'd say that he's one of the most open-minded people, but I remember him not being quite as infatuated with it as I was. But I suppose, especially the first part of it, I was totally taken aback by that part, the strangeness of it, and then also the ending sequence. But and especially the traffic sequence, I remember that vividly, and that sort of stuck with me. That one and the pink room sequence, both of them are very interesting in terms of sound, and that's sort of been what I've always worked with mostly, also academically afterwards. There was something in the visuals and the sound of the film that interested me already back then, although many things in the film are still sort of inexplicable to me. I've never really been that negative toward the film. I just wanted more Twin Peaks in whatever incarnation.
Right.
But I remember back then I didn't like, because I saw everything that of David Lynch that I could get my hands on, and I wasn't really that fond of On the Air back then. And I've seen that afterwards and come to sort of see that it has actual qualities that I didn't recognize back then. So, I mean, it's not that I loved everything that he did, but Fire Walk With Me, it has a lot of things that I liked back then that I still like. There was a clear continuation of Twin Peaks elements, quirky characters, strange, absurd, slightly humoristic elements, but then it also has a darkness and an expressionistic side to it that I think is present in the last half of Twin Peaks, but that you don't see all that much in the first season of Twin Peaks, and but which you see in a lot of David Lynch movies, and a lot more, because I suppose it's more easily get away with it in cinema than he could back then on network television. So it appealed to me back then, and it still does. I don't know which David Lynch film is my favorite, really, but it's by far the film that I've watched the most times, I suppose, both in movie theaters and on video cassette, DVD, and whatever. When pushed, I suppose I'd say that Lost Highway is sort of, perhaps that's sort of my favorite if I were to point to one. And I don't know, it sort of shifts every day. But Fire Walk With Me is the film that I've sort of had the most personal relationship with. Perhaps also because a lot of people just readily dismissed it, even those that define themselves as Twin Peaks acolytes.
Yeah. Do you think it's a film, Fire Walk With Me is a film that you can really watch without seeing the series?
It's more than an addendum, at least. It's not just a continuation of the series, and I think it's less of a continuation than many people would have wanted, but no, I'm not sure that it would be able to stand on its own.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know since I saw it after the series, but I think there are many elements that are really strange and surreal, even if you've seen the series. But if you haven't seen the series, I think there'd be other elements that make no sense to you. No, I don't think it would be able to stand entirely on its own, but I think it was more independent of the series than what some people would have wanted.
True.
And I must say that I think some people wanted things of the film that would not be fair. I mean, it's about the last 7 days of Laura Palmer's life, and we know that her life was a tormented one. So how could you expect it to be about coffee, donuts, and stone throwing, and why should Dale Cooper be sort of the most central character? I think some people just missed him. I mean, he's part of it, but I think some people saw Twin Peaks perhaps mainly because of him.
Yeah.
And because of that very charismatic character and Kyle MacLachlan's very, almost ingenious way of playing that character. But I think Cheryl Lee is just as amazing in this film. It's just such a different kind of character in such a different kind of much darker and misanthropic world we're dealing with. But I on the other hand, I think I would have to agree those people who argue that the film is not altogether homogeneous. It's not altogether in harmony. I don't know that I don't know how to phrase it, but it is kind of disjunctive. But I kind of like that too.
Me too.
Less disjunctive than Inland Empire, but certainly more disjunctive than Mulholland Drive and Lost Highway, for example. And I think it really fits in that cycle of films, that 90s, early 2000s cycle of Lynch's films that deal with identity troubles and sort of are almost one-character movies, where we delve into a character who has, extreme identity problems. I think that's sort of one cycle of his films, and then we have other films that are slightly more linear and classically narrative, like Blue Velvet and The Elephant Man. And so I think it fits into sort of a cycle of David Lynch movies that came really later in a way, and that's so it's supposedly most homogeneous example in Lost Highway. I think that's the most clear-cut, altogether homogeneous version of that kind of film, where we're dealing with a character's problem with identity and a lot of stuff like that, and domestic abuse, stuff like that. All those themes piled together into a very dark film, spiraling into some sort of hell. And I remember some reviewer from Denmark describing Shirley's performance as histrionics or something like it. And I think that's just altogether wrong. I really think that I really think even though I think I would, I'd be, if pressed, I would argue, yes, it is kind of a disjunctive film, and if you don't like that, you won't like Firewalk. Yes, it is darker than Twin Peaks, and if you don't like that, you won't like Firewalk with Me. But I just can't, for the life of me, I can't see how you could argue that Cheryl Lee's performance is not incredible in that movie.
It was incredible. A lot of people think she should at least been nominated for an Oscar. I mean, at the very least, nominated. I mean, she was
Golden
amazing.
Globe.
Golden Globes, yeah. But I mean, she really was brilliant, and the things that what she had to do, and the to get into those scenes, it just amazes me. I mean, really incredible. We're running out of time, Andreas. But I wanted to tell you. So you've got your book, TwinPeaks, that's out, which I really love. I think it's a great fan book. I mean, I really recommend that. You've got your 16:9 video essays that I definitely recommend checking out.
Now I can watch them.
Yeah, now Bryan can finally check all this out. What are you up to next? I know you were talking about maybe working with something on Joel on a book, and do you have other plans related to Twin Peaks?
Yeah, well, JoelBocko and I, that's in the very early stages. We are sort of working on a project about Mark Frost. I've been interviewing a few people connected to that, but it's really in the very early stage. And then I'm working parallel with that. I'm working on another book about sound design, which is kind of, and it's not unrelated because, of course, some of the people in that book that I've interviewed are, some of them are just great sound designers like Randy Thum and Walter Murch, but some of them are great sound designers that have had something particularly, they've had something to do with David Lynch too. Randy Thum, for example, he did the sound design in Wild at Heart, and Anne Kroger that I've also talked with, she worked with David Lynch on The Elephant Man and Dune, Blue Velvet, and Lost Highway. And she was also together with, or her partner in life back then was Alan Splett, whom I suppose most fans of David Lynch would know, because until he unfortunately died, he was the man behind the sound of David Lynch's movies. David Lynch was my window into the world of cinema, and the two elements that I've come to spend most of my time on are David Lynch and sound, things that I think are very related. And Fire Walk With Me is actually also sort of a part of that book, because Douglas Murray, who worked as a sound designer on that one, together with David Lynch, they talked with him as well in that book. So, and I think a shout out to Fire Walk With Me. For those who haven't seen it, certainly it's worth viewing, and I think we should pay close attention whenever Mark Kermode he says something, and he has, among other people, right? He's one of those who said that it certainly needs a reevaluation and a reappraisal. And I mean, even Mark Cousins, in his film history book, The Story of Film, has included a few pages on that particular film and even images from it in his film history book. That says quite a lot. I mean, in David Waldorf's old film history book that he did with Kristen Thompson, there was one paragraph about David Lynch mentioning almost all of his films without mentioning at all Fire Walk With Me. And then we have now a film history book that sort of singles it out as a very important cinematic point in film history. So I think that tells us something of a shift, and we sort of gradually come to acknowledge that we might not like it. It might not be a classical continuation of Twin Peaks, but it certainly is worth viewing in its own right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Andreas. That was really cool. And I mean, we could probably go on forever and talk about this, but we'll definitely continue. You know, next year it'll be the 25th anniversary of Fire Walk With Me, so I know we're going to revisit this next year.
Oh, definitely.
So that'll be really cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I hope we can talk again soon.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you for talking with me. It was very fun.
All right, we're on the phone with Mya from Twin Peaks Fanatic.
Fire Walk With Me was like a huge film for me when I was a kid, because I had seen the pilot through When Maddie Gets Killed originally. So I guess I'm a first waiver, technically. But where I left off in the series, I was like dying for more of Laura's story. So I was really excited when I heard about Fire Walk With Me, and I dragged a girlfriend of mine to the theater. And we were in junior high, but I don't know, we got in. We always said it's our movie somehow, probably because there was like a 15-year-old selling tickets.
Yep.
And we saw it, and I remember we were the only girls, and we were definitely the youngest, and there wasn't many people in the theater at all. God, I think the movie, the first watch, so many feelings. I mean, I was scared, definitely. Bob always scared me when I was young. Now I laugh at him, but also, I think the movie was a much more emotional experience because of, you know, how intense what is going on with Laura is.
Yeah.
The whole thing was kind of like a mind-blowing experience for me. And it was kind of the movie that made me a Lynch fan, you know. I mean, from at that point on, I wanted to know all about him, and I wanted to see everything. I don't think I even really knew who David Lynch was before I saw Fire Walk With Me. So I loved it. I loved it a lot. And God, then, you know, it used to take a long time for movies to come out on VHS at that point, but now they come out like 2 months after the movie's in the theater. But after that, I used to rent it all the time and watch it. So I watched it many, many, many times before I ever saw the whole series and then the movie. I really loved it. It's definitely my favorite Lynch film.
You kind of tell this story on your blog, Twin Peaks Fanatic, and you kind of go into that. You would rent the VHS tape of Fire Walk With Me, but you would hide it from your family, and when your family wasn't around, you'd be watching that, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, you know, they're great people, my family and everything, but they were, you know, very conservative, and you know, my dad used to kind of censor TV a lot when I was little, so. I think I had this feeling like, even though I was a little bit older at that point, I was in junior high kind of time, but I don't know, I had this feeling like they would not approve. And I think because I kind of had an emotional reaction to it, I didn't really want them to know how much I liked it, you know?
Yeah.
I think I thought they would think I was weird or something. So, or they would worry or something. So it was kind of like my secret.
Yeah,
but I think in a way that made it fun, you know, that kind of made it more fun.
Yeah, that movie has a lot of weight to it. And I think if I saw that as a teenager, I wouldn't want my parents to know I saw that, because it's just the subject matter was just too over my head as a teenager. Even if I got it as a teenager, maybe I would, I don't know. But I would still want nobody to know I saw it because it was like the theme is so dark.
Yeah.
You know, even now,
Yeah.
in my 30s, I saw it and I felt like emotionally like drained by it.
Totally. My mom used to think that Twin Peaks was the devil show. Like she just thought it was evil. Like this is the TV show. And like I'm trying to figure out how did I get to the theater? Like I didn't have a car or anything. So I'm guessing my mom drove me there, parked me, and said she'd pick me up.
What were you saying you were going to see? The Great Dumbo Drop?
I'm sure I said Twin Peaks.
Oh.
I'm sure she still hated the idea of it, but goodness, if she knew what the content was, I think she would have. I would never be able to watch movies or TV.
Drugs and sex and all that stuff. It's like, no way.
No.
Yeah.
And in your blog, you mentioned that you kind of like knew people like that, girls like that maybe had a rough time, similar to Laura.
You know, Laura's very special. I don't know if anybody's quite like her, but I definitely, when I got a little older, like after Twin Peaks time, there was definitely a couple girls that I was friendly with who got a little bit, were a little troubled maybe, and a couple of them had a little bit of a dark side, and maybe because I did love Twin Peaks so much and I loved Laura's story in a way, I was maybe attracted to troubled people just a little bit.
Yeah.
So, I in all honesty, but yes, a couple of them were. They did kind of had a dark path, and it was kind of sad. And I think all that stuff kind of inspired me to write that piece on my blog.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned the idea that maybe some of these girls didn't bounce back, that they didn't, it's unfortunately that maybe they had a hard life and they never really recovered, which is really sad.
One girl in particular, I don't think it was a sexual abuse, but you kind of remember things when you're younger and weird things and being in friends' houses and seeing stuff, and her dad was definitely kind of a weird guy, and I'm pretty sure there was some physical abuse, and there was definitely times, even like in front of me, he would call her like a loser and a slut, and
oh, geez.
really terrible things. So I knew, and I think then, she would act like she didn't care, and oh my God, she'd almost laugh it off, but then she'd go do something, really wild and crazy. And it was kind of reminded me of what Dr. Jacoby says to Bobby about Laura, like how she felt corrupted about herself, so she wanted to corrupt other people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I don't know, what your guys' experience was in your own lives, but I know, you meet a couple wild folks and you know that some of them, they kind of do like to start trouble. And it's kind of sad too, because I think you can make some mistakes when you're young that some people don't come back from,
Yeah. That's true.
I'm curious to know, maybe from a woman's angle of this, about David Lynch. I came across a TV Guide article that was talking about Fire Walk with Me, and I remember this whole word about titillation, or about sometimes it seems like some people think David Lynch is sexist and that he he has women that are just naked for the sake of being naked. I don't get that, but I want, at least not in Fire Walk with Me, but I want to know maybe your perspective on how maybe David Lynch portrays women.
I think that David Lynch in general is never going to show you something that's comfortable. I think his style is to kind of shake you up. Sometimes maybe he's showing you women through like a male lens, but then other times I think he's kind of sensitive to women. And even though, there's a lot of nudity and sex and stuff in all his films, but there's usually a point. There's usually a reason. And I think sometimes for the sake of the story, like particularly within Fire Walk with Me, in the series, it's talked about how wild Laura was, but in the movie you really get to see it and you kind of take the journey with her, and I think it has more of an impact.
Yeah, definitely.
So in that way, I was never really... I can't say I was never a little shocked, or maybe I never blushed a little bit, but I've always been willing to roll with whatever he was going to show. I think he kind of loves women. To be honest.
Yeah. Laura comes off as, she's strong in her own way.
She kind of took back control in her own way.
Yeah, she took back control of her own way because she had no control. But ultimately she had the ultimate control, and I think that allowed her to move on and be happy. So I think, I never got, as a guy watching the film, I almost felt like she was more empowering in that movie.
Yeah.
Generally, I really always felt like she deserved an Oscar for
I
her
agree.
acting in Fire Walk with Me. I think she got kind of gypped there because that's a really intense part, and she was a young actress. kind of an experience too. So I really always respected what she did there, and I don't know if it would have been the same if it had been somebody else. I mean, she just had something kind of going that was so intense and kind of spellbinding, I think.
Yeah, I think
Watching her.
The running theme of this episode has been everybody has said the same thing you have said,
right?
About her winning an Oscar.
But I think all of us are Laura Palmer fans. You know, a lot of the frequenters of your show kind of all had a love for her, and that was kind of the key mystery that drew everybody in. In a way, she's kind of like the hero at the end. You know, at least in a way, she kind of fights Bob, I think, or she gets away from him. You know.
Yeah, she doesn't let Bob in.
Is there favorite parts of the film for you?
I always love the scene where Leland's in the bedroom with Sarah, and he's kind of manic, and he's rocking, and it's almost like Bob is there, and then he has that moment of it's Leland, and he starts crying. It goes into the bedroom, and he tells Laura that he loves her.
I love you. I love you so much. Good night, Princess.
And after that, she asked the angel painting if it's true, because, you know, she's kind of trying to, I think she's in, denial at that point a little bit, but she sort of knows it is her father, or she's coming to that realization. I always thought that always choked me up, that scene. And, of course, the first scene with Bob, when, oh, my God, she gets the painting or the picture that is supposed to go on her wall, and she goes up the stairs real slow, and then Bob creeps out behind the dresser there. I can remember screaming in the theater when I first saw him pop out from behind the dresser. But now I kind of laugh at that scene, but when I first saw it, it scared the crap out of me.
It is scary to see Bob there. we always talk about the angel scene, and in the missing pieces, you have Hayward. He says he foreshadows that's the ending of the movie in the missing pieces when he says you're going to see an angel.
Yeah.
And I watched Missing Pieces, which you'll hear my reaction next week on the show.
Right.
That scene hits, and even Ben was like, "Oh my God!"
I missed it. I don't think I've seen that. I mean,
we were both like, "Oh
wow.
my God!" At the same time, right. And it's interesting. I'm glad they took that scene out because it hits you over the head. It's like, this is gonna happen. But it was so cool.
I feel like this is the only guy in the whole movie, we're not calling him really Cooper, that really was there for Laura. In his own way, he was like, hey, why do I let you smoke? And why, but he was
like the real father she always wanted.
Yeah. I was going to say, it kind of stinks when you think that Ben Horne might be Donna's father. Because I love Doug Hayward, but I guess we'll find out where that goes in the new season.
Yeah, the whole father thing. I had a weird theory. I'm like, what if Ben Horne is really Laura's father too? What if he just fathered everybody?
He fathered the whole town.
He slept with her at one
point. Oh no!
Oh yeah,
that's too much.
Oh, okay. That
he almost,
my
he
out
almost
of the water.
slept with his daughter Audrey at One Eye Jackson.
You're right.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
What do you think about the first 20 minutes? What is your take on meeting all these new characters before Laura's story?
It kind of seems like in some senses certain things might be happening at different points of time or different dimensions. And I think the missing pieces stuff kind of, when you see, David Bowie's character come out of that, it looks like he comes out of a wall.
Yeah.
Sort of, in Buenos Aires. I kind of think that there were spirits from the Black Lodge or even maybe the White Lodge that were kind of leading Dale to the Black Lodge all along, in a way. In the My Life, My Tapes book,
which we're going to read in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
In that book, there was a lot of things that kind of suggested that Bob, or something like Bob, was after Cooper from the time he was a young man. So I don't know. I think Agent Desmond may have just been part of a grander conspiracy to get Dale to the Black Lodge.
Interesting.
But I'd certainly be curious to see what other people think about that.
So Mya, I know that you just recently had a blog post on, I think it was episode 12 that you're on?
Yes, and then I actually had a guest blogger do one for Eraserhead recently, which was fun. And,
nice.
We'll be continuing on with the recaps and then probably some more movies, lunch movies this summer. So
Very nice. I would recommend it. I mean, you could do Wild at Heart. We're coming up to the 26th anniversary of...
Ben loves anniversaries.
I love anniversaries.
Oh, yeah, I love Wild at Heart. It's a great one.
Yeah, so I think that's in August. It'll be the 26th anniversary.
Yeah,
so.
and I'm watching all the movies come we're going to do the movies as well.
Right.
And I can't watch the movies until the anniversary. So anniversary, I get to watch the movie.
I still have power over Bryan. Even though we don't have the show anymore, we don't have Fight or Walk with Me, but I will still hold Lynch movies over.
I'm like, I want to watch this now. No, you must wait till anniversary.
Well, I can't wait to check out what you're writing next and on Twin Peaks Fanatic.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mya. Okay, we're on the phone with ScottRyan. He is he co-hosts the Red Room podcast. He's got his documentary film on the Fest, Voyage to Twin Peaks. And I remember talking with you or hearing that you have a theory about Cooper's hair related to the series and the movie.
Oh, man.
This is my thing that I noticed, and it is in reference to Fire Walk with Me and the Missing Pieces. So I never really noticed this until the Missing Pieces came out. But Cooper's hair is done in two different ways. And I'm going to call one of them season 1 hair, which means that it's parted on the side and it is split down. And then there is season 2 hair, which is combed straight back. In Fire Walk with Me, he has both haircuts in the Red Room with the man from the other place. Now, that cannot be a mistake. That can't just be like, oh, someone didn't know. They combed his hair this way once and combed it that way once. That is not how David Lynch works. There's no way. So I think that is letting you know that the Red Room has time. Some sort, because there is going to be... And if you watch it and you notice where Cooper's hair is parted, in the beginning of Fire Walk with Me, and this is what actually plays in Fire Walk with Me, when he's saying, Laura, don't take the ring, his hair is parted on the side. And that is because, in my opinion, the only Cooper that can interact with Laura is the one that's parted on the side. That's what happens in episode 2. That's when she whispers, you killed my father. I think that is Laura's Cooper, and that is one Cooper that's in the Red Room. Our Cooper, the one we follow through, came into the Black Lodge in episode 29. His hair is straight back. At the end of Fire Walk with Me, if you view it as the Missing Pieces, and the man from another place even says, do you know who I am, and all that stuff, you see a fight. The second time, his hair is parted. It is not parted, it's flicked back. So that is our Cooper that knows Annie, and that's when he even realizes Annie is out there. And to me, the reason this matters at all is because I think this will make a difference in season 3. Because to me, it means Cooper can age and change. So our Cooper that comes out of the Black Lodge 25 years later, I think he can be older.
Yeah.
And if you watch it, you will be able to see, and I think it matters at which Cooper you're looking for. Explains why Cooper can interact with Laura before he even goes to Twin Peaks. In a strange way. Like that is, it's almost like Laura pulled him there to be her guy. And also the same at the end of the movie, and this is in the Missing Pieces and not in the Missing Pieces, so it doesn't really matter, but the Laura at the end that sees the angel and stuff, his hair is pulled back. So to me that means it's farther in time. that's different than the other one. So I don't know if any of what I said, I communicated in a way that made sense.
I like that. I like that.
That I don't think Lynch just was like one day, have him part it this way, have him part it that way. Because you even see that scene twice in The Missing Pieces.
Yeah.
And I think his hair is I know, actually, his hair is done differently in both ways.
That's interesting. And so I wonder also then, like, the part that where Laura sees Cooper is really a dream too, right? So it's not reality; it's her dream about. And I think it mentions in the series when Cooper reads Laura Palmer's diary, she's saying that she's dreaming about Cooper and stuff too. So she has dreams about Cooper, and maybe when she's having dreams, it's parted to the side, and then.
Well, this is a thing that I really meant to bring up on our mythology channel, and I must not have seen the card, or I mean, it was getting really loud in the grades, so I wrapped it up a little bit. But I don't think that those are dreams. So at the end of episode 2, everyone calls that Cooper's dream, but it is not a dream. And I don't think Laura has a dream there. I think they actually go to the waiting room of the Black Lodge. And the way that I can back that up is in episode 8, when Cooper's laying on the floor and he's shot and he sees the giant, he says, "Where did you come from?" And the giant says, "No, the question is, where have you gone?"
Right.
Oh.
So I don't think they're visions, and I don't think they're dreams.
Interesting.
I think they're actually there. They're being transported to the place.
I definitely agree that with the season premiere, it felt like there was this white light, and I don't know if he's in the White Lodge or where he is, but I did wonder if he was somewhere else with the light and the giant. It's hard to say with the dream though, like episode 2, with Cooper's dream, to think that he's somehow been transported 25 years later to the Red Room.
Scott, it's interesting. You say. So, like, the Black Lodge has time, or we've been saying we believe it doesn't have time. So whatever happens in the Black Lodge, it just can go anywhere. So it would make total sense that if he was old, Laura's young, or whatever, it would make sense because there is no time. They can just go and enter this place.
But I agree with what you said too, and I've said that also, that the Black Lodge has no time. And so I can see how therefore it seems like I'm contradicting myself. But in my mind, I'm not contradicting myself. And what I mean by that is that there can be passage of time, but it also has no meaning. It doesn't have time like that. So I think you can go forward, you can go backwards, and I think once you're there, you're there. And that's why Cooper can go backwards and forward.
Yeah,
at that point. I mean, he probably doesn't have control over it at that point, but I would say that it doesn't have meaning, but you can age, and there can be time passage. Also, I think there could be multiple versions of him. Like, I think the one is kind of Laura's Cooper that pulls him there when his hair is parted, and I'll be so fascinated in season 3 to see how they do Cooper's hair when we first come to see him.
I will be looking at the hair now.
I know. I have to look back and check this out.
And it really is true. If you watch The Missing Pieces and you just look at Cooper's hair, you'll see that it is different from the Cooper that says "Don't take the ring," and the Cooper that says, like, "How do I get out of here?" To him, and I think it's the difference of time at that point. It's how Cooper was wearing his hair.
Yeah.
And it would be interesting if Laura could literally pull Cooper to that place even before he'd been there.
Interesting. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, hair is a small detail, but you don't see Lynch or anybody in that crew just random.
Yeah.
I see a detail like that not being random. You know?
Right. But that's what I thought, too. I mean, there's just no way. The thing that really tricked me about it is that I had always noticed in Firewalk with Me the change in the hair. But it's when you watch The Missing Pieces and then you see them in order, then you see, oh, well, in this section, he had his hair this way. And now we know, which before The Missing Pieces, we didn't realize that they did move ahead to 29 or 6 weeks.
Interesting.
'Cause, you know, now in the Missing Pieces, you get to see stuff that happened after the series.
Yeah,
And we know that Cooper changed his hair there. So, you know, it's one of those questions that, of course, has no answer, but I think it's an interesting tidbit.
What did you think of it when you went to the theater to see it?
I loved it.
Yeah.
I truly did, and I feel like it's one of those things that people always say now, because Firewalk with Me is love, and back then it was hated. I went with a bunch of people, and everyone I went with hated it. But I had seen other Lynch movies, and they had, and it felt like a Lynch movie to me. Like I mean, I had already seen Eraserhead and Blue Velvet and Wild at Heart. So I kind of knew him a little bit more than they did, and it felt like a Lynch movie to me.
Yeah.
Now, there's no doubt that I was disappointed that we didn't get more of the story, and I think it's so fascinating that they did film, you know, what happened with Cooper and Bob. Of course, I wanted to know that, but I just went down the ride, and, you know, I mean, I didn't love Laura Palmer and Cheryl Lee from the series. I was always a Cheryl and Ben fan. Now, I mean, Cheryl Lee is my end-all, be-all. And I mean, I just love Laura Palmer, but it was Firewalk with Me that did it. And I don't know if I told this on your show or not. This is how sick and weird I was in college, but Firewalk with Me was always my birthday movie. So for like 10 years, I watched Firewalk with Me on my birthday every year. That was like my thing I did.
Wow.
Which is really sad and depressing.
That's awesome.
Oh, man.
That's so cool.
So I've seen it like so many times. That one of the things that I said when we covered The Missing Pieces when it first came out is it shows what a true artist David Lynch is. I think like maybe the truest artist, because you have to be an artist to cut what you know every fan in the world is gonna want and gonna want to see. So
and do you think that Lynch was thinking he'd just make multiple movies? I mean, like the original cut was like 5 hours long. Firewalk with Me, and do you think people wonder, was he thinking, oh, the next movie I'll just use stuff from this film to make, you know, and include it or something?
You know, I don't know what he could have possibly thought. I really don't. I have a feeling that because it was financed from that French guy, I can't think of his name, but it's, you know, like Francis Bojubaju.
Right.
I think because that guy was really funding it, I have a feeling that Lynch didn't care. And he, you know, had a script and then sort of went off those things. Because, like, I had never read the scene with the bank guy with the 2x4.
No, I never saw that either. Yeah,
I don't think that's in the script and stuff.
I think
he was just sitting there and like, hey, get me Jack Nance and Joan Chen.
Right.
I'm going to improv a scene today. I don't think he cared.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that's how season 3 is going to be. I'm sure there were days he just went off script.
And I think some of the best stuff comes out of that. Like, I mean, even like you have Cooper and Harry Truman playing with their chairs.
Yeah.
And things like that where it's off script, but it's just, you know, it just felt right. So I'm hoping there's more of that in the new series. Yeah.
Well, I think that there definitely will be.
So Red Room Podcast, this week you had Sherilyn Fenn on the show. I mean, what a great get.
It was unbelievable. I'm not trying to, you know, spike the ball because I know that Sherilyn Fenn is your Cheryl Lee, and, you know, it would kill me if you guys got to interview Cheryl Lee and I didn't. So, you know, with all due respect, she was so charming, so sweet, answered everything. I mean, I think in the beginning she was a little concerned, like, you know, it's got to be something to, like, call and not really know what you're going to get into. But I had really prepped my question. I was ready to go, and I had good acting questions right from the get-go. We didn't just talk about TwinPeaks. We focused on her whole career. So,
Awesome.
Because I love Boxing Helena. It's one of my favorite. I think it's her, and I told her, I said, with all due respect to people who love Audrey Horne, I think the role of your lifetime was Helena in that movie. I mean, she gives so much. So we really had a really good talk about Boxing Helena, and that's where I started. And I think she realized, oh, this person knows my career. He really wants to talk to me. And she really she was so honest and really opened up with me.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's so cool. Oh, I'm so happy for you. I would love to talk to her someday or have her on the show. But if it wasn't for us, I'm glad it was the Red Room podcast that you guys got.
I can't wait to listen to it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think you guys will love it. I honestly, I'm curious what people are going to think of listening to it I think it's a very me interview, but I don't know if fans of Twin Peaks are going to be annoyed with me. I never talked to her about season 3. I didn't ask her a question about it. It's the same when we had Charlotte Stewart.
Right.
They signed a non-disclosure agreement.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm not going to waste my time.
Right.
Because, we had agreed to talk for 45 minutes, and I try to keep, I'm watching the clock, because I'm going to be respectful to her time. I'm not going to waste my time trying to pump her for information that she's not allowed to talk about. And honestly, I don't care about season 3. I wanted to talk about Wild at Heart, Boxing Helena, Elizabeth Taylor's story. And she's done a lot of amazing work in her career.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think to be respectful that she was nice enough to be on your show, why would you blindside her and be like, give us information and then get her in trouble? So, yeah, you made the right call.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if people are going to be like, why did you ask her what to do? And
she's not going to answer.
Right. Yeah. And it's a waste of my time. I'm not interested. When season 3 comes out, I would love for her to come back on and talk again. But for now, so if people are going to be tuning in for that. But that being said, she does give a little interesting tidbit about season 3 without me asking, because she just happened to mention something that I think is interesting. So I will give you guys a tease for that.
Nice.
She does say something that should give Twin Peaks fans a lot of hope.
See?
I'm hoping it has something to do with Cooper.
Yeah, right?
Don't say anything. I want to listen to your
Yeah, we got to listen.
But
those are the best. When we had Michael Horse on, and we didn't ask him about season 3 at all, and he gave us something.
Right.
We were talking about the teaser of season 3 because he was in the teaser, and he gave us information that nobody had known.
Right, about the actors who were going to be with him.
Yeah, and Andy and Lucy being in there.
Yeah, right. And you're gonna love it. And stuff. It's like, wait a minute, and I don't think anybody knew for sure that the actor, the Andy, was going to be in it and stuff. So that was cool. That was really cool to be able to, when the actors on their own do that. If they want to do it on their own, they want to share. That's good. But let's not push
pressure.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly how I felt like. We talked about David Lynch a lot because, of course, we're going to. That's what, that's definitely an important relationship to her and what we're all interested in. And so little by little, things would fall out. But, I didn't want to dwell on that, and I wasn't going to ask her, what is Audrey Horne carrying when she goes to One Night Jackson and does that third trip? Like, she's not going to know that.
Yeah, I can't wait to listen to it. And I'm really amazed with the Red Room podcast. The Red Room podcast not only focuses on Twin Peaks, but also on other TV shows.
Yeah.
But in the last couple of months, you've had Charlotte Stewart, you've had the guys from the Twin Peaks Frequently Asked Questions book, and it seems like every few weeks you're having something related to Twin Peaks, which is exciting to be listening to. And
Well, yeah, and it's that time of year with all the fests, and I'm promoting the documentary. So we kind of come and go, and then it's funny because in between that, Josh and I did a discussion about the WB network from the 90s, and we just put that, that podcast sits in between the panel we did with you guys and Cheryl and Ben.
Right.
And Josh and I, my co-host, Josh Minton, we joked about it, and we said, no one cares about this at all. But we're going to discuss it because that's what we like to do. We just sort of talked about this moment in time when the WB was there to do television that taught teens morals, which doesn't exist now. Dawson's Creek, Buffy, Everwood, Gilmore Girls, Felicity, and we just discuss that topic, and
Yeah, I was listening it today, and I was enjoying it.
I did hear the promotion of that. I had to listen to it.
That'd be cool. But yeah, it's good stuff. I enjoy all the stuff that you guys cover on the Red Room podcast. But
yeah, we try to do different things. I'm also working on doing a Hamilton podcast. So that's what I love about our podcast, is that we cover it all. We just do whatever, if it's about art, we want to do it. So.
Yeah.
Nice.
So would it be on the Red Room, or would it be its own podcast?
No, on the Red Room. We're going to do one on the Hamilton musical. I've done a couple different musical things on there. I mean, I just want to cover what I'm interested in.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I mean, why not?
Yeah.
And then I just want to let your viewers know that I believe I'm going to get The Voyage to Twin Peaks up on Amazon for rent and for sale.
Awesome.
Nice.
Very
That's
cool.
It's only going to be 99 cents
Awesome.
to rent. I'll be heading to the Twin Peaks Fest, and I'm going to record the panel for you, and we'll get you some information there. So hopefully
Thanks,
you'll be able to play that.
That'd be awesome. And so for people who want to be able to reach out to you, how can they contact you or learn more about everything that you're doing?
Definitely follow at Red Room Podcast. That's on Twitter, and we have a Facebook page, Red Room Podcast. That's the best way. And then my personal Twitter is at Scott Luck Story. I'm everywhere.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Scott, for sharing your theory. I'm definitely going to have to rewatch Fire Walk with Me and The Missing Pieces to see the different hair.
Cooper's hair.
Yeah.
I don't know what it means, but I know that it means something.
Right.
That's all it is about Twin Peaks.
Right.
I don't know what it means, but I know it means something. I think that should be in the back of the Twin Peaks, a quote by ScottRyan. I don't know what it means, but it means something.
Right. So you're suggesting that I do a T-shirt tie-in with the Voyage to Twin
Yes.
Peaks?
Yes.
It says,
Yeah.
I don't know what it means, but it means something. We'll split the money between the two podcasts and sell them those T-shirts.
That sounds
That'd be awesome.
Well, thank you, Scott.
No problem. It's always a joy.
All right, we're on the phone with JoelBocko, the guy who does video essays of Journey Through Twin Peaks.
Yeah, so I wanted to start off just by going through kind of each person's experience. I'll end it with my one, but first, Bryon.
My journey with Fire Walk with Me has changed from when we recorded last week's episode to this week's, because in between we went to the Great Southern and I talked to everybody and and heard different theories and stuff, and it's been awesome. I want to watch it again to answer your question about that. I haven't. My goal now is I'm reading John Thorne's book, then I'm going to read Lynch on Lynch, and then I would like to watch the show again. I'm going to watch the show again, but in season 2, I'm going to cut out the bad episodes. Like I'm going to skip
episodes?
the 5. I'm going to skip over them and then rewatch Fire Walk with Me, because I just feel Twin Peaks, because of that movie, feels like a circle.
Basically, Joel, you have video essay that focuses on that gap, and I think that's the exact gap. I don't know if it's episode 17 to episode
23. I think that's those are the exact ones we discussed. Not the last time I was on, but the previous time.
Right. Yeah.
The middle of the season. But what did you think when you saw the movie the first time? Like, what was your initial reaction?
All right, so I watched it at night. ScottRyan said, watch it like a horror movie. Watch it at night in the dark. So that's what I did. I watched it, and it really took me off. Like, I was like, I'm getting invested on these 2 new detectives. What's going on? I'm trying to read between the lines, like overthink everything, and then bam, it's Laura Palmer's story, and I had no idea.
That's right. You didn't know too much about how it would.
No, I didn't know how this movie was. But as soon as they showed the Twin Peaks sign, and I heard the music, I don't know. It was so awesome. Like, I felt like I was, like, I know Ben was like, I waited a year to watch it, and to see everybody's name on the screen, you see all these characters, you get so excited. Even though I just finished watching the show, I still got excited to see my favorite characters again, because all of a sudden I was like back in Twin Peaks, and it's Laura's story, and I loved it. And I enjoyed it a lot. I even liked the first 20 minutes. the first 20 minutes, by the end of the movie, I forgot it happened because I was so invested in Laura's story. I think overall for me, I was like, it gave me everything I wanted. It gave me Laura Palmer. It gave me her beginning. We've seen her middle, and then it gave us a sweet ending. It was depressing and sad, but the ending to me was it was Cooper saved Laura. And I felt like he saved someone. He never met her, and he was like almost like the one man in her life that they never met. And without even knowing her, he helped her, figured out the murderer. He allowed her to move on in life or in the afterlife.
That's a great point. So in other words, he didn't help her within the film so much as on the show, and the end of the film is kind of a reflection of that.
Yeah.
As you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, because when she saw the angels and he was there by her side, and it was sort of like, it was such a sweet ending that she can move on now because, you know, her killer was never found until he figured it out and everything.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it was a tough watch. It was rough. I mean, it was some parts you're just kind of like, oh my God. And I did not expect it. I expected a movie about David Bowie being in there. Like, I was expecting all this other
stuff. He was there
stuff.
for about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
If that, 30 seconds maybe.
Yeah, and I was expecting like the adventures of David Bowie's character along with Chris Isaac, because I knew he was in it. And I was like, and then all that just goes away, and you're like, it's a prequel, it's a sequel, it's everything, but it still embodies Twin Peaks, like that feel. I mean, the humorous, quirky stuff was gone, but I didn't care.
There was
didn't
just some
bother.
dark humor.
Yeah.
It was dark humor. It wasn't like
There
wasn't a little Nicky in it or anything.
Yeah. It wasn't anything silly, but
not missed.
Yeah, but I really liked it, and a part of me right afterwards, I told Ben, I said, if this was the movie, I feel like we're in good hands for season 3, because if this was the movie. And how dark
David Lynch's vision. Right?
Yeah, and I think Showtime is gonna allow him to like do this, but for 18 episodes, and he can get quirky, weird, dark, and he likes to get very sexual. He likes to get very like just crazy with different things that he couldn't do on ABC. And I'm like, I feel like season 3 is gonna be a treat. I think it's gonna be really cool.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think a lot of critics will say when the new series comes out, I think you're right. I think it is going to be really different, probably more like the film, but also different in its own way. And I think a lot of critics are going to go, well, what's this? This isn't like the show. And it's going to be evident right away that they never saw Firewalk with Me.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, a lot of people who are just more casual fans or casual viewers still haven't seen it. They don't even realize what a huge chunk of Twin Peaks they're missing.
Yeah, that's true.
But so I'm hoping that Showtime, even if it's mostly just symbolic, because I'm sure most people will watch it on streaming anyways, the reruns.
Yeah.
I hope that they air the film as part of the reruns with the series.
That'd be good.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna, and from what I've heard, without spoiling anything, I think it's gonna be necessary to at least to have the full context.
Yeah.
So Ben, I wanted to ask you, what was your initial? Can you describe your initial reaction and your whole process with Firewalk with Me?
Well, I would start with before I even saw the film. So I mean, like, I was always getting TV guides and Entertainment Weekly. I would watch Entertainment Tonight. I would try to get any information I could, and I remember getting information about, like, okay, Mark Frost is not going to be helping writing the film, and Kyle MacLachlan's not in the film. Oh, he's going to be in some of the film. And then even, like, Sherilyn Fenn, who played Audrey, is not going to be in the film. Oh, and it's going to take place in August. And August is usually a bad time for showing movies. And I'm going in thinking, like, oh, this is going to be a really bad movie. Like, and then I knew also that it was going to take place 7 days before the death of Laura Palmer. So I'm like, oh, it's like we're not even going to learn about what happened after the series. I want to know what happened to Cooper. And so I went in there like a little concerned, really concerned. But like as soon as the lights went down, I mean, I saw it the first weekend it opened on that Saturday. And it wasn't a filled theater. There was a bunch of people, but the lights went down, and then the music and and that blue light, and I think Bryan was saying how all of a sudden Kyle MacLachlan's name comes up as a title, and the whole crowd started clapping and cheering. It was so excited to see his name.
You saw it with like the one crowd that apparently enjoyed it.
Yeah, they were clearly
or the one crowd that was even in the theater.
Right, and who knows what their feeling was after they left? But at least when they saw the name, they were excited, and you felt like you were surrounded by fans, and so. I like the film. It disturbed me. There's definitely parts that are really hard to watch to see this woman, this young lady go through this stuff and the drugs and the sex and what she's put through. But I love the mythology. I love all the stuff with the Red Room and the Little Man and above the convenience store. And so that to me was like always kind of like you leave the theater thinking like, oh, what does this all mean? And I need to see it again and try to understand it. So I liked it. But I can tell you, I went in kind of really concerned because I knew it wasn't going to be what I expected it to be.
Yeah.
So you knew what the story would be, pretty much.
Right.
I can't remember how much I knew. I knew it was a prequel. I knew it was about Laura, so I knew and I can't remember how I even knew that, to be honest, because I don't remember where or what I read about the show because I tried to avoid reading stuff about it while I was watching it. And I think I told you guys when I started watching it, I thought they never even solved the murder, so I didn't even know. So I'm not sure at what point I found out it was a film, it was a prequel. Like, it's just total black hole in my memory. I wish I could recover it. But I watched the film about 3 or 4 days after the finale, and it's actually the first piece of Twin Peaks I ever reviewed, because I hadn't written about the series while I was watching it. But I got it on a Saturday, and I had I'd say pretty similar experience to Bryan in terms of I think I watched it on a decent-sized computer screen with headphones on, which I highly recommend. Because it's such an immersive soundtrack. And actually today when I watched it in preparation, there were like people in the other room, and I had to turn it down a little, so it wasn't quite as immersive. But the screen was a nice size. But yeah, so that first time it was like totally hypnotic. And my experience was kind of unique. Oddly enough, I haven't heard that many other people have this reaction. I've seen like one or two in all of the different responses I've read, which was that I was watching the movie. Right from the first frame, I was like, oh, this is good. This is a David Lynch movie. This is enjoyable. When it got to the Laura stuff, I think I had my doubts for like a couple scenes, like, well, is this just going to be kind of like, hey, here's Laura in high school, and not really, do anything new with it. But I think probably around the time that they were like on the couches talking about the angels, it was like, no, this is going to go where the show would. And, I could kind of tell already it was going to do that. And as it went along, I was just more and more hooked in. It was one of the most memorable, visceral film watching experiences I've ever had. Like in a theater, at home, wherever. Like it's just, when it was over, it was like, I had very rarely been captured that forcefully by a movie. But I also was really uncomfortable with it because it made me, even though I just watched the show and loved it, it made me wish that it wasn't the Twin Peaks movie, because kind of like Bryan was saying, I was so into the Laura Palmer story in a way that I had not, I knew that I always found her character fascinating and all of that, but I hadn't expected it to be so emotional and so devastating. And I found myself like almost a little angry afterwards at Lynch. Like, why did you make this a Twin Peaks movie? You should have just taken this character and given her completely her own movie and forget about the Deer Meadow, forget about like the Little Man in the Red Room and all the things tying it in. And then it was funny because I read the reviews and everyone was complaining about the exact opposite. They were like, there's way too little of the show in this. We want more cast members. We want more humor and quirkiness. And it was like, what? Okay. So I had kind of the opposite reaction. And I'm definitely, I say within 24 hours, I kind of sat with it and was just like, well, I think this is a flawed movie, but man, it's one of the greatest movies ever made nonetheless. Because it was like the Pink Room scene.
Yep.
That scene is just incredible. Like the first time I saw that, it was almost like an out-of-body experience, just the music. And I didn't even see the right version. I saw the New Line DVD where they upped you can actually hear what they're saying because they messed with the sound mix. But even that version was like transporting, it just like a trance almost. And the Mike yelling at them in the traffic and just all of those scenes, they were so overwhelming, So I just, any movie that has scenes that great and a performance as good as Cheryl Lee's, that performance totally blindsided me. I had no idea she would be that good in that movie. I really didn't. Like,
So all we had was
I thought
Maddie,
she was
right?
fine.
Yeah.
I thought she was fine as Maddie on the show. There was nothing wrong with it, but it wasn't like, I don't think any of the performances on the show, as good as they were like performances that I would put with, like, Brando in Streetcar, or Pacino in Godfather, or any of those great all-time performances. They were very good TV performances. But when I saw her in that movie, it just knocked my socks off. It was like she was that person, totally. And when you read about it afterwards, in the making of it, you realize, like, she really did, the persona of Laura really did take her over, and she almost felt like it was like a spirit working through her. But it really makes me think of that scene in Mulholland Drive, where the whole movie, Naomi Watts has been kind of this chipper, naive character, and a lot of people who watch it are like, because she wasn't famous at the time, like, well, this woman's not really a good actress. Like, she's fine for the part. But this Naomi Watts can't really act. And then it's not even like her performing as that character. Her character is playing another character within the movie, and suddenly she's like out of this world. And you're just like, whoa, that's exactly how I felt watching Cheryl Lee in that movie. And I honestly think the scene in Mulholland Drive partially comes from David Lynch's experience of working with Cheryl Lee in that movie, because he's talked about how he had the same sensation. It was like, okay, well, she's Laura Palmer, so we're casting her in this movie, and hopefully she does a good job. But I don't think even he expected her to be as phenomenal as she was. So that was like my takeaway the first time, but I was kind of like, why did we need all this extra stuff? Shouldn't it have just been her last days without like trying to put anything supernatural? And also, it was the first time that I really struggled with the Leland Bob thing, because I just kind of rolled with it on the show. I nobody really wants to think about the incest, so they kind of, I think most viewers kind of just go, oh, okay, it was an evil spirit. That's a much more comfortable, even though it's not really when you think about it, it still doesn't change the facts of it, but it allows your mind to kind of grasp onto an excuse and look away. And the moment in the film that really kind of gut punched me was when she comes home from Donna and he's sitting at the table and they're sitting down to dinner, and he starts talking to her about washing her hands and starts yelling at her. And it was just kind of like everything you didn't really want to think about from the show was confronted in that scene. And it's just like, okay, no, this is an abusive father, period. Anything else you want to throw onto that is extraneous. This is a father abusing his daughter. And so when the Bob stuff comes into it, I was really uncomfortable with it. Now, after kind of dealing with it and writing about it and watching the show and the film and reading all sorts of takes on it, I do feel that I think Lynch leaves it somewhat ambiguous in the film, arguably to the film's detriment. I don't know. You could kind of go back and forth. Is it good that it's ambiguous? Is it not? But I do think he tips his hand, both in the film and in interviews outside of the film, that he definitely holds Leland culpable, and that Leland is aware of what he's doing, whether or not. I think Bob is definitely real. He's not a figment of the imagination, at least within the context of the show. He's a real presence, but you get the sense that he's working with Leland. He's not just taking over this empty vessel and using him. And I think if he was doing that, which some people do read this film, including Ray Wise, incidentally. Ray Wise, in his mind, tries to separate Leland and Bob completely, which is interesting because his performance in the film is much more subtle than that to me. There's a few moments where it's like, okay, he's definitely pushing the, evil when his face changes and stuff. But a lot of the other moments are much more subtle, and it feels like he's playing Leland's being bad guy. But to him, he separated them. But I think to Lynch, he tips his hand numerous times, especially in Lynch on Lynch. But also within the film itself, and some of the scripted lines and the delivery and everything, it's clear that Leland knows that he's been abusing Laura, and that he's aware of it, and that he's probably rationalized it to himself by saying that they're having some sort of illicit romance, and she's consenting to it. Because at the end he says, I always thought you knew it was me. When he's tearing up the diary. So that's pretty devastating. So for me, it was kind of a struggle because it kind of shattered Twin Peaks completely for me. Even though I went right back and watched the show and enjoyed it, it's like Twin Peaks is never quite the same after you see Firewalk with me. I think it permanently shifts your perspective And some people reject it because of that. Other people embrace it.
In the movie, is like you almost emotionally, it's exhausting. Emotionally exhausting.
Yeah.
After the movie, I felt like I went through a marathon of emotions. You know, like every emotion I could think of. I was happy to see people. I was sad for people. I was, like you say, it's like, oh my God, you saw things that were just hard to process. And after that movie, I felt tired, like more tired than I should have been. I'm like, wow. Like you just feel like, and it does take a while to process it. Like when I talked to Ben about it, when we recorded last week's show, and then The Great Southern, hearing other opinions and thoughts, and then like it makes it easier to swallow the whole movie. But overall, it was good, you know.
I've done a lot of theorizing and discussing about it, and we're going to get to it as we talk. I have a very definite reading of the film that I sort of choose to embrace. I think the film is ambiguous enough that you can take what you want, but this is the reading that makes it work the best for me. But even after coming to that conclusion, which was, at least a half dozen times watching the film before I kind of started to draw that reading, even after that, when I watch the film, I'm not making sense of it as I watch it. Even now, it just washes over you, and you're on the ride, and it's not an intellectual experience at all. Afterwards, I can sit down and digest it and open it up again and look at it. But while I'm watching it, it's just you're along for the ride, and it's not really a rational movie.
Yeah.
Even though I think it has a rationale buried within it. And that's another thing I think people didn't like is TwinPeaks was and it was the whole Mark Frost, David Lynch thing. It was very much a balance between the sort of rational and the emotional, and you're savoring this cup of coffee and looking at the wind blowing through the trees, but then we're also learning a little bit about this mystery and this plot and advancing. And it kept those two, the sort of right brain, left brain in check. And Fire Walk with Me really doesn't. I think it's actually much more coherent than people realize, but it's on a subconscious level. On the conscious level, it's just an experience. It's just a visceral experience.
Yeah.
And you can't really process anything about it.
And I don't know if we always think about it.
Except maybe the first part with the detectives, but even that is purposefully inconclusive.
Yeah.
We don't always think about that Bob Engels co-wrote the script with Lynch. And so I don't know how, I still don't know really his style. I mean, I know he was a producer and he wrote for the second season, but it's hard to know what is his and what is Lynch's in Fire Walk with Me.
I have the impression from his work on the show and also just from interviews with him, where it sort of comes off as very kind of humorous and enjoys sort of like the esoteric humor and sort of fantastical offbeat elements, almost sci-fi in a way where he talks about Cooper being in two places at once. I feel his presence a lot in Deer Meadow. I think it's got exactly the kind of razor, deadpan humor that him and Lynch shared and that Frost didn't quite. I think Frost plus Lynch to me comes off as more quirky and kind of almost a little like parody, a little like farce. Him and Frost, I think, on the air and at least that premiere episode and some of the other stuff that him and Lynch worked on. You hear about their ideas for the One Saliva Bubble and everything. They're very sort of like quirky and almost joyous. The Engels Lynch is almost like a little bit crude, a little bit deadpan, very kind of like acerbic humor, which is just Deer Meadow to a T, So I feel like he had a lot to do with that. I have never, ever been able to figure out what he had to do with the Laura stuff, and it drives me nuts because I've listened to so many interviews with Engels, and he always kind of navigates the conversation, I would say mostly to the Lodge stuff and the Jeffries and all of that. Like, he loves to talk about that stuff. When he talks about Laura, he talks more about the show. He says, well, there was sort of a spirit of grief that developed the town, that when we took that away, the show really lost something, so it was good to go back and capture that. He doesn't talk as much, from what I've heard, about actually developing that part of the story. So I would love to know. I'll tell you this. I'd like to think that maybe that one line of Donna's is his when she says, "If I had a nickel for every cigarette your mom smoked, I'd be dead." I want to give him credit. I mean, that could be Lynch too. That's definitely totally consistent with Lynch's absurdist sense of humor. But I like that about the film. It very much has that kind of dry, absurdist edge, which honestly I like a little more than the wacky side. That's the word I was looking for before. I think Frost and Lynch together sometimes get a little wacky. I think. And Engels, he was there for all the wacky stuff, so I'm sure he has that side too. But I see him and Lynch combined as a little more dry and kind of arch.
Can Fire Walk with Me really stand on its own? Like, does it need Twin Peaks to be a movie?
I don't think it does. I think it benefits from Twin Peaks. I think it's more complete. I think without the show, the messiness of it is much more apparent. But I still think it works on its own. And that's a bit of an educated guess on my part, because obviously I saw the show first and I can never unsee the show when I watch the movie. But I've heard from a whole lot of people who have seen the film first, just reading reviews online and talking to people, and almost all of them like it, which always surprises Twin Peaks fans, because I've heard a lot of Twin Peaks fans say, I love the movie, but don't ever watch it if you haven't seen the show. You will not get any of it. You'll be lost. You'll hate it. And I have heard some people say that, I saw it before the show, and I was just like, who are these people? What's going on? But most people I've heard, at least as long as they like David Lynch films, they're just like, yeah, there's a little man with a ring. That's no weirder than Mr. Roke in Mulholland Drive. It's no weirder than the creature behind the diner popping out.
Or the mystery man from Lost Highway there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's actually quite consistent with how it works, because it makes sense on an intuitive, emotional level. You don't need to know all the context, and actually, most of that context is purposefully left out of the film. I think they say the word lodge once when Annie is in Laura's bed, but for all the talk people do of, Black Lodge, White Lodge, in the film, they never mention those terms in the movie. True. It's almost like Lynch was kind of resetting it a little bit. I think he was building on what Frost created, but he was also resetting it a little bit and bringing it closer to something much more ambiguous, where it's not so much of a black and white struggle between, good lodge, bad lodge. You're never quite sure what the little man and Mike and the Tremonts are up to. They're very unsettling and eerie, but they also kind of help Laura, so it's a little harder to put your finger on, The Angel is good and Bob is bad, but the in-between is harder to pin down. But so anyways, I do think the film works on its own. I think the surrealism works on its own, and I think the most interesting conclusion people draw when they see the film on its own is they see it much more like Mulholland Drive. I think a lot of people see Mulholland Drive and they say there's a perfectly rational explanation for this. Naomi Watts is dreaming in the first part of the movie, and then she wakes up and you see it's like a decoder ring. You see, here's the cowboy was somebody who walked by when she was in her moment of devastation. The guy in the diner staring at, her as if she's a monster. He ends up in the dream seeing the monster. It's like almost a one-to-one correspondence, and total real-world explanation for everything. It basically means that the surrealism is an expression of psychological trauma. And a lot of people who see Firewalk with Me on its own draw that same conclusion. They say, well, Bob isn't real. He's a projection of her imagination. He's the tool that she used to deal with sexual abuse. And the movie is about her discovering, just like, Diane wakes up and is reminded that she killed her lover. And their reading of the film is, Laura's basically, her subconscious is sending her clues and messages and making her aware that, her father is actually her abuser, and she's breaking through the veil and seeing him for who he really is. Now, even if you think Bob is real, which the series certainly encourages you to do, that reading is actually still pretty plausible, because finding out that her father is her abuser, which he is, doesn't actually negate the idea of an evil spirit also being involved. Yeah. But I think it's interesting that people who see it as a standalone, they totally respond to that allegorical aspect, which is really what captured me on the first viewing. Seeing, it almost, like I said, it really recast the whole show in a different light. It's like for all of those episodes where you're off with little Nicky or Evelyn and there's all these other things going on, after you see Firewalk with Me, the whole show seems like an expression. It seems centered around the central event, which is Laura was raped by her dad. And everything else radiates out from that. And it's hard to unsee that. It's even the irrelevant stuff, it seems like, that's the characters going through denial and running away from that fact and getting wacky because they can't deal with the fact that this member of their community was, like an abuser, and then this girl they loved was abused, and they didn't do anything, and they couldn't do anything, they didn't know what to do. So it really and I honestly think that's how it is for Lynch as well. I think when he started the show, he was in love with this idea of an ensemble story with it still had a very tight center, but that center was never really going to be revealed. Maybe it would just be known to him and Frost. But I think after it was revealed, when he kind of went back and dealt with it again, it had shifted somewhat, and now everything really was about Laura. To an extent, maybe he didn't even realize. I think he wrote all those other characters into the script, and then when he shot it and cut it, it probably became apparent that really the story he had wanted to tell was Laura's the whole time, and he almost didn't know it. And the other stuff for him was almost a little bit of a distraction. As much as he loved those other characters and situations. And so I've never really totally bought the people saying, oh, well, they were going to make a trilogy of films, and this was just the first one. I think they may have kicked around that idea, but it really feels like this is Lynch for that time. Obviously, he's coming back to it now, and who knows what that will mean. But it feels like almost unconsciously he was putting a final stamp on it and saying, no, this is about Laura. This is her story. Everything else radiates from that. And when he went back a year later and did the Log Lady intros, the very first one he scripted, the Log Lady says, it's a story of many, but it begins with one. One who leads to many is Laura Palmer, and I knew her. And it's like, that just is that's the final thing. And then even the entire mystery, it's her face on the front and all this stuff. It's like he keeps drawing attention back to her. And I think for Frost, it's very much always been about the town as a whole. And I think for Lynch, it's always very much been about Laura as an individual.
I like your idea about how maybe like the townspeople want to forget or they want to almost ignore it, because you think about episode 17 and you have Sarah Palmer saying, I don't want to forget, and then we never see Sarah again, really not till the last episode.
It's like they exiled her from the show for saying that.
She says that, and then she's basically gone, and then there's no talk of Laura Palmer almost basically to almost the end. I mean, we have a scene in the Double R Diner near the end where Annie talks about saying, "Oh, we should do this, in remembrance of Laura."
For Laura,
Palmer. But really, I like that idea in a way that everybody's kind of either James is getting on his bike and running away, or everybody's dealing with it in their own way. But that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So,
it's funny because, just to kind of add to that quickly, it's funny because there's a meta level to that as well, which is that at least some of the people involved with the show felt similarly that, okay, Laura, and Brad actually articulated this really well in that mythology panel that you guys ran last week.
Yeah.
For a lot of the executives, and I think for some of the creators of the show, Laura was like, that's our gateway in. Ooh, a dead girl washes up on shore. What a great way to meet the town. Okay, but now let's move on.
Yeah.
And for Lynch, it was like, no, let's not move on. That was the whole point. It wasn't supposed to be just a MacGuffin to get you to pay attention. That was supposed to be the whole point of the show. Whether or not you knew it, it was going to inform everything that happened, that sort of sense of mystery and longing and tragedy that was just under the surface. So
you do wonder if the audience, is it too much for the audience from week to week? You have Sarah Palmer crying and in pain. I mean, this is reality. Reality is, grief doesn't go away in 1 week. Grief goes on for a long time. And the show, at least for the first season, you had characters in grieving for 7 weeks in a row and stuff. But you wonder if the audience can handle that long of grief.
And you know what Firewalk with Me though gave us that story that like. It's like, as an audience, why should we care about Laura Palmer? We've heard about her in passing from characters
in the diary.
And the show doesn't paint her out to be this wonderful person. You find out some dirt about her, and it doesn't paint her. She's a victim. We know she died. But at the same time, we're like, well, she doesn't sound like a good person. We don't really know what's happening. She's been cheating on people and bad things, and she's into drugs, and we don't know her. For some reason, we care about her. We were like, we want to know the killer. We want to know the mystery. But when you see this movie, I felt like she's a tragic story, and you really care. You feel for her, and it gives this dead body a personality you can get behind. Like, I didn't get that until I read the diary. When I read the diary, I was like, wow, this is sad stuff. And the movie really gives you that diary. I felt like I was watching a movie version of the diary.
Right.
But
that's beautifully put. Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, I mean, It's almost amazing that in a TV world that was the inn was the dead girl mystery, but it's such a shame that more people don't. Hopefully Showtime will show this movie, but it's a shame because you almost feel like the people who don't see this film are just missing. Yeah, you're missing a part of the whole story. And here's a weird question. I feel like, okay, this movie, maybe a lot of people aren't going to see it, but the movie does give us an ending to Laura Palmer's story. And you don't get that in the show.
Right. No, they brush it off a little. It's a very perfunctory ending. Like, well, she saw her father and embraced him and they're at peace now, which doesn't work. And after you see the film, it really doesn't work.
Yeah.
Well, at the same time, he said he saw the light and he saw his daughter and she was happy. And we end the movie. We end the movie with her in light.
But then, like the final episode, she's still in the red room and she's screaming.
Well, that's her doppelganger.
I know. But like, yeah, you're right.
The timeline is very tricky on all of that.
It is tricky.
It is tricky.
There's no time in the red room.
Yeah, that's what we think. There's no time.
We don't even know when that is.
In the movie, it really gives you that like a really profound, like she sees the angel and Cooper's there, and it's like she moves on. And you reminded me that Leland does say that when he's on the floor. I see my baby and she's happy. So I guess, but that happened so long ago. And then when you watch the last episode, I forget about that. So I guess it does give you some sort of closure. But I think Firewalk with Me, for me, gave me real closure almost.
Totally agree. And I think it's so notable too, like you said, that this inn of the dead girl, like there's something really profound and amazing about Firewalk with Me that it even exists, that makes me so angry about the way critics wrote about it. Not just, okay, if you don't like it, that's fine, but they were so cruel and dismissive about it. And there's some great writing on the film. And a few people had some pretty profound things to say. I think Diane Stevenson, who wrote about the family violence aspect of Twin Peaks and how it uses the fantastical to kind of deal with that subject. She said it's very notable that, a lot of these critics got so offended by the movie. Like, I don't know, I would definitely recommend, Brian, if you get the chance, go to Metacritic, go to Rotten Tomatoes, Google it, and look at especially the original reviews from '92. Like, the recent ones, it's much more of a mixed bag, but if you go back and you read the actual reviews, they're the most vicious reviews I've ever seen of any movie.
Wow.
I'll stand by that. I've never seen more vicious reviews of a movie. Just people saying David Lynch is filth. This is maybe the worst movie ever made. It's unbelievable. And she pointed out, this was actually a pretty common defensive psychological tactic to not dealing with subject matter that you don't want to deal with.
Yeah.
So, and Martha Nachemson pointed out, she said even some of the positive write-ups of the film, specifically by a lot of the male critics, never once used the word incest or mentioned that the movie was about abuse. So there's this kind of denial that characterizes the show, and it also characterizes, at least for a time, the discussion around the show. And so it's kind of fascinating to see that intersection. And what makes me marvel that David Lynch actually said, we're going to take this show whose whole premise is a dead girl, and the male detective comes to, be the hero and save the day and reveal her mystery and all of this stuff, that he actually said, okay, now we're going to make a movie showing you the last days of her life. Can you imagine? And this is 25 years later.
Yeah.
Acclaimed, this is a dark everything. Can you imagine True Detective making a movie about, I think her name was Dora Lang. Like, I can't even remember the character's name.
Yeah.
Can you imagine True Detective ending and then making a feature film about the last days of this prostitute who they would never it wouldn't even occur to him to do that, and that's 25 years after Lynch did it. So it's really a pretty radical concept to make the hero of your movie the murder victim. And somebody whose life is very messed up, who's a teenager, who's a prostitute, who's a drug addict, not at all this sort of conventional hero. But I think she does actually end up being a hero, which is sort of one of the interesting aspects. And that's something I think it took me, even liking the film right away, it took me a while to kind of see that. And actually that kind of brings us back to what you were asking, which is how it stands as a standalone film. I think as a standalone film, It's a masterpiece. It's a great work of art. I don't think it needs the series. I do think as a narrative, it's incomplete that way because there's a lot of stuff there. I think there's a way to dig into the movie and see that Laura, she's not just a static character who experiences all these things and then dies. She's actually an active protagonist who, and John Thorne is really the one who helped point me in this direction to see this. She's really an active protagonist in a narrative, even though the film is, you don't watch it and feel like you're going from point A to point B to point C. It's not that type of story. But there really is a structure to it, which you have to understand. You have to have seen the show to get that, I think, to a certain extent. You can take it so far. You can understand that she's discovering who her abuser is, and you can understand that she's sort of pushing her way out of the trap she's in, which seems to be the only way out is to die. But to actually understand how she's victorious, I think you have to know the series for a few reasons. But before I get to that, I just wanted to say, so there's almost like three ways you can watch this film. You can watch Fire Walk with Me as a standalone film, no relation to the series, and I sort of discussed how that would work and not work. You can also see it as a subversion of the series, and then the third way is you can see it as actually a fulfillment and a completion of the series. But the subversive aspect, I think, that's what jumps out to everybody right away. And we talked about why. It's like you have a dead girl show where now the dead girl is the hero. That's pretty subversive. But also, the fact, of course, that you're with these other characters right away. And Deer Meadow is clearly a doppelganger reflection of Twin Peaks. Fuzzy Diner and the nice one. That kind of jumps out at everybody as well. But even stylistically, there's just something about the film which feels so jarring coming from the series. I think one thing to remember is after the pilot, they shot everything on sets and California locations. And every now and then they would insert an exterior shot of like the diner, usually the same one you've seen a dozen times. So there's kind of a beautiful closeness to it. And actually, what made me want to watch the show again right after I finished was I watched the making of documentary, and they show them building the sound stages, constructing them, and then it's almost like Disney World. So there's something I love about that. It's so cozy. It's like they shot in the Great Northern, and then they made this Great Northern with the antlers hanging from the sea. Each place has a theme. One-Eyed Jacks is this one. And there's a little element of, like, fantasy. It's like that old Hollywood sound stage where you could be in a Western saloon, and then you walk 2 paces, and you're in, like, a spaceship. And it's just wonderful, but there is that feeling. So when you watch the movie, right away, that shot of the airplane going through the air, and there's just this feeling of openness to it all of a sudden. And it's kind of like it's exciting. It's like there's a feeling kind of anything could happen, and it's almost like you're out in the real world. You've kind of woken up from the fantasy a little bit, the fantasy of Twin Peaks, and now this is kind of the reality, even though it's also somewhat dreamlike. It's dreamlike in a very different way. So you've got that kind of outdoor texture, and the way it's shot is also very different, especially in the second half, but even in the first, there's an instability to the framing. Often there's a little bit of like, even in the Deer Meadow stuff, there's a lot of sort of static shots, but if you look, there tends to be a little wobbliness at the edge of the frames. Later they're using a lot of Steadicam. I don't think they're using as much Steadicam in the Deer Meadow stuff, but with Laura and all that, it's a very fluid movement, which is also something you saw a little bit on the show. David Lynch, I think, first used Steadicam on the season 2 premiere when they're like at the Hayward dinner supper club, and then some of the other shots, and when they're at One-Eyed Jack's rescuing Audrey, there's that sort of, so you get a little of that in the show, but the show is almost entirely locked down. There's not much camera movement in Twin Peaks at all. And Fire Walk with Me, there's a ton of camera movement, and the cutting is much more impressionistic. There's a lot of dissolve. There's just a fluidity to it. So it's very, like, immersive in a way that the show isn't. So both stylistically, thematically, narratively, it just stands in sharp contrast to the movie, and almost like a rebuke to it. Like David Lynch saying, here's the problems I had with the work that I did and others did, and we're just kind of like slap it in the face a little. And I think a lot of fans took offense to that at the time. Like, dude, we sat through like 2 seasons when nobody else would watch your show, and now you're basically, you're sending out a girl in a red dress dancing to make fun of our theorizing. Which I don't know if that I don't know if that's necessarily what he was doing, but it definitely reads that way a little bit. Like, hey, AndTelevision.TwinPeaks, you think the rose means this and that. Well, here, I'm just going to completely make fun of your theorizing by having this obtuse dance that we're going to literally go down the line and be like, oh, this means that, and this means the sheriff is, in prison and all this nonsense. So
right.
it's pretty funny. But
Chet says, I'm not going to tell you the blue rose means, though. Like, he's kind of like, I'm telling you stuff, but you're not going to know everything.
That's why I don't feel like it's completely a joke.
Yeah.
Because he does leave that, and it makes you kind of feel like, okay, well, he's playing with us, but he's also somewhat serious that this stuff means something and pay attention. Just it may not mean, like, as literally... as literal as Chet Desmond explains it. Everything is like a direct one-to-one code for something else.
Right.
But, so there's that kind of subversive aspect. And then I think we'll get to pretty soon sort of the fulfilling aspect where, and that took me a long time to see. I would say actually the missing pieces are what made me realize that there's actually, it's not just a film like negating the series. It actually follows through on it in a lot of interesting ways.
Pretend we don't know that the series is coming back. Does Fire Walk With Me complete the Twin Peaks universe? Like, does it have basically an ending? Do you feel like that it basically tells a story that does end Twin Peaks as a whole?
Yes, I do, and it's interesting you ask it that way because there was I think 2.5, barely more than 2 months period between the missing pieces coming out and David Lynch and Mark Frost announcing that Showtime was going to air a new series. So during that period was the point where I came to realize, oh, Twin Peaks is complete. It doesn't need more. And then they were like, and now more. And I was like, oh, wait, what? Like, it took me years to get to that point of like, oh, okay, there's a completion to the cycle. Yes, Fire Walk With Me is an ending. We don't, and then it's like, now they totally changed my expectations. But I do honestly think, yes, I think pretty much for the reasons Ryan said, I think that feels like an ending, and it feels like we've at once come full circle and reached a point of resolution.
Yeah.
And the analogy I always use is a whirlpool. I feel like we start at the very edge of the whirlpool where we're discovering this dead body, this almost inanimate object, but there was life there, there was mystery there, and you want to know what it is. And then you get to the end where she's pure spirit at this point. Her body is dead, and they actually dissolve from the shot from the pilot of her being opened in the plastic. They dissolve to the curtains and her face in the red room where clearly that's not her actual body. We're just getting a visualization of her spirit coming to peace, And so, it does work that way. Now, the only part that I guess you could say is unresolved, it could be resolved in a negative way if they had left it, but is Cooper.
That's...
From the end of the series, what we're left with is Cooper, the good side of his spirit, is still alive in the lodge and there with Laura, so it's not like he was erased. But as far as the worldly part of Cooper goes, it seems to be totally corrupted, and there seems to have been this fall of the hero. And that is ostensibly where we leave it. And there's something powerful about that, too, which goes back to the subversive idea, because Cooper is the hero, and essentially what Fire Walk With Me does is it says, here's a twist. And Scott voiced this really well at that forum as well, when he asks, who is the main character of Twin Peaks? Is it Cooper or Laura? The film tells us, surprise, Laura was actually the hero. She's the only one to defeat Bob. She's the one that we're going to end with. And she's been that presence throughout, even though you thought she was kind of the object of mystery and not the actual protagonist. But, so now it'll be interesting to see how this series brings us. I think, Cooper, I assume that Cooper is going to be the centerpiece of the series, in the sense that this series is going to be about Cooper's struggle with evil, just like Fire Walk With Me was with Laura.
Yeah,
now it's going to be hard to do because they split him into a good and evil half, and that's also going to make the reading of Leland complicated.
Yeah.
Because it reopens those questions of, well, if there's an evil spirit involved, is the person also responsible? If Cooper is partly responsible for evil Cooper, then how can there be a good Cooper in the lodge watching all of this unfold? How can he be in both places? So they're going to have to come up with some way to deal with that, and I can honestly say I have no idea. I can't think of a way to deal with it that is psychologically compelling but also like internally consistent with what they've already done.
It's
I think that's one reason it felt like an ending, because I was like, well, what could they do with Cooper
Right.
from here? Not too much.
Yeah.
But I guess they can.
That's something we've talked about. The Leland thing, it's so hard to say who killed Laura, Leland or Bob.
Right.
But then now if you give us a split on Cooper, does that give us a definitive answer now? Does that say definitively there are a doppelganger, which is bad, and there's a real one that is the good one? And is that,
Is
I mean...
Cooper responsible for that evil
Yeah,
one? Is he still...
Or
does
the
he
Red
take-
Room.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
sort of the question of, okay, they're responsible for initiating it. And, you know, they even say that in the show, although they kind of pass up, well, Leland was a little kid, you know, and
Yeah.
left the demon, and it wasn't really his fault. So even there, they kind of give him an excuse that they don't even give Cooper. I think, yeah, that's the tricky part of it, is because, honestly, I think there's nothing that compelling, to be honest, about an evil spirit who takes somebody over and absolves them of responsibility. It's not, to me, if I'm watching that, it doesn't tell me anything about real life. It doesn't set up like an interesting drama. I think to pull that type of thing off, you have to remove it more to the allegorical level. I don't know, like something like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah, I
the
think...
metaphor works because you're like, okay, you see that this guy set this up and now he's out of control and he's in control and he's out of control. But when you take it to the level where they take it in Twin Peaks, where they're giving us a realistic portrait of somebody who's been abused, to then layer on top of that, oh, and her abuser wasn't responsible because he was... That to me is almost, I hate to use this word, but it's kind of irresponsible, you know? It's like, if they made it, I think the analogy I used with Sparkwood and 21 is I said, what if Schindler's List ended with like, you know, oh, this was awful, but the Nazis were all werewolves. They weren't really, you know, it would be like, it would just be, it would be tasteless. So to me, that's sort of tragedy that happens to Laura, which is so real, which happens to so many people. And unfortunately, in real life, the abusers always have that. They always have their excuses, the reasons they weren't responsible. Oh, this, they wanted it, or this or that. So to make a narrative where you give them an excuse doesn't sit well with me. So that's always kind of been my trouble with it, but I'm willing to kind of give it credit because I think he does tip his hand in a lot of ways that no, Leland is responsible.
Yeah, well...
But the question is, how does that story go forward with what they set up for Cooper?
Well, yeah...
It seems like they either have to deny the fact that he's split into two totally separate beings, which they set up, or they have to deny the fact that you can be responsible for the evil spirit and be collaborating with it. So they're going to have to find an in-between there.
Yeah, in the Red Room, Cooper, if I can remember what was said, it was he didn't face himself. He didn't face the evil.
Shadowy self. He ran away from it.
He ran away from it.
Right.
So Leland, as a kid, he ran away from it as well. And he allowed that evil out.
He let the
evil in.
Right.
So I guess it's that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde mentality. Well, I get what you're saying, because I agree with you. But I think because it's like a TV show, they give us that mystery of, is it or is it not? But you're faced, maybe in life we're all faced with that shadowy self, every one of us. And either you take that route or you don't. And then in this world, it's more mystical and they give us a different plane, a different place where other people are, and this evil can be you can be seeped into evil. It is weird if you think about it, but like, well, why would Dale all of a sudden just be evil? Because he's a Boy Scout, but he got brought into that world. So
well,
now
that actually opens an interesting question, because the question is, Laura as the film presenter and in the diary as well is struggling with Bob. It wasn't like a single moment of let him in, don't let him in. She's clearly been letting him in.
Yeah.
And yet she's not fully possessed yet. She still has the power to resist him. And so it opens up a couple interesting questions, one of which is, would there have been a moment where he basically accomplished victory and there was no turning back?
Yeah.
And I think there is kind of that moment. But also it opens up the question, so let's say that happens, and we'll leave Cooper out. As we said, Cooper complicates this wildly.
Yeah, it does.
So we'll see how that works. But just in context of the film, the portrait of Leland it presents is somebody who has opened that door long ago, and they've allowed that presence in, but they're still making decisions and they're still acting in ways that enable that evil, and that empower that and allow it to do what it wants with them. So it's not simply a question of a puppeteer pulling strings. It's more like they're kind of holding hands in a way, you know?
Yeah.
And in a way, you could actually make the case that Leland is using Bob, although I don't think he's aware of him I don't think he sees somebody in a jean jacket. I think that's when he looks in the mirror. I don't think Leland Palmer is seeing Bob. I think he's sort of he's inviting Bob in once again.
Yeah.
And without being conscious of him as Bob, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think on a subconscious level he is, but I think on the conscious level he's making decisions every step of the way that Bob encourages and instigates. And if you look at the actual definition of a parasite, it's not, a parasite isn't a puppeteer. It's something that sort of siphons off the energy and it can change your behavior and things like that, but it's feeding off of what you have within you. So if you look at Leland, what the crimes that are committed, he murders 3 people, Teresa, Maddie, and Laura. And each one, Leland has a very strong motive to kill himself. Teresa, it's completely obvious what his motive is. She was, especially when you see the missing pieces, but they mention it in the film too. Jock says in the pink room she was going to blackmail somebody. She asked about your father. So he had a clear reason to kill Teresa. Maddie, he had a clear reason to leave because she was going to leave. She was his Laura replacement, and now he kills her the day she says, "I've got to go back and start my own life. I'm leaving you guys." And then he kills Laura because there's a couple reasons, one of which we'll get into in a minute. But one of them is that she's basically confronted him and said, stay away from me, and made him have to face what he's doing.
Yeah.
And you can't escape it any longer. So I think in all of those scenarios, there's a sense that he's calling upon Bob. And throughout the movie, Fire Walk With Me, there's always a sense that the characters, there's a psychological trigger which calls forth the Tremonts, it calls forth Mike, the little man, Bob. There's always a motivation. There's always like a dramatic motivation for them to appear. So, for example, Laura gets her diary taken away. Well, she has to give it away because it's been exposed. So now she's more claustrophobically enclosed than she's ever been. And that's the moment when the Tremonts appear to give her the picture with the open door, kind of opening her up to a different level of spiritual reality. Now with Leland, when he goes to pick up Laura in the morning after the pink room, he sees her on the couch with Donna and he kind of smiles, and then that image triggers suddenly his memory of seeing Renette and Laura on the bed, which is troubling for a number of reasons. One, it's seeing his daughter in a sexualized way, which makes him, not just have to, any father would probably be uncomfortable with that, but the fact that he is the one who sexualized her that way puts another level on it.
Yeah.
Plus, it very literally reminds him of the fact that he murdered Teresa, because that was the incitement that, starts the ball rolling for him to kill her. So he sees that and he's horrified, and that's pretty much the dramatic trigger. It's that scene followed directly by Mike, Philip Gerard, in the car, chasing them down in traffic and yelling at him about killing Teresa. So there's literally always a connection on the dramatic level between the psychological motivations of the characters and the appearances of the spiritual phenomenon. There's always a trigger. It's never just random. The spirit pops in and says hello. They don't pop up and dance on the bed,
Yeah.
But there's always a dramatic character motivation reason for it.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's really something.
So I think that's something to keep in mind watching it. And to give credit where it's due, there's a great essay. It's called Cherry Pie Wrapped in Barbed Wire. And it's this guy's reading, how do you reconcile these two aspects of the Twin Peaks universe? One of which is that the spiritual stuff is real. These are real spirits. They are possessing people. They are taking over. Now, at the same time, how do you reconcile that with the emotional weight and the agency of the characters? Somebody like Leland, somebody like Laura, somebody like Cooper. How do you reconcile? Because it seems like one would trivialize the other, and one would kind of negate the other,
Yeah.
So I highly recommend that. That was one of the things that started kind of motivating me to piece together, and not just being like, well, it's kind of it's a compromise within the film because that was they set up a supernatural thing and then they had to stick with it. It was actually like, no, well, wait, how does the supernatural actually empower the message of the film rather than, you know, just assuming that it's somehow undermines it.
Interesting. I like that. Yeah. And I'll just throw you maybe and Leland killed Jacques in the show. So like I'm just gonna kill Jacques and he kills him and we don't think anything of it. Like he killed the bad guy.
Killed the killer.
Exactly.
The killer.
It's another case where he's covering something up.
Yeah.
And kind of letting himself off the hook in a way. Like, I mean, Jacques was, among other things, he was the last witness. He was also, well, he doesn't know that, actually. I was going to say he's the one that Teresa spoke to, but he wouldn't know that.
Yeah.
But it's still interesting that, you know, he's almost covering his tracks.
Yeah.
There's always a double motivation in everything Leland does. And I think he is really unaware of a lot of things. I think the film makes it clear he knew what he was doing with his daughter. It leaves, I don't know if he just completely blanked out about the night. I think it's plausible that the character does not remember killing Laura after that night, that he's just completely, his personality has been so split at that point that it's like, I think you could almost make the case that the reason he seems more split down the middle in Twin Peaks than he does in Fire Walk with Me, where the Bob and the Leland kind of bleed into each other, is possibly because of the trauma of killing Laura. That actually split the Leland part and the part that's totally collaborative with Bob. Or I shouldn't say that because both parts are Leland, but the good Leland and the bad Leland, so to speak. I think maybe that event just completely, psychologically, just compartmentalized them in different ways. And I think Daniel, well, I don't think I've talked to you guys yet, but we talked a lot to Sparkwood in 21. He talks about Bob possibly resetting Leland at the end of Fire Walk with Me. Almost kind of erasing his mind, which works both on a literal, supernatural level and also a psychological level.
You think about that
he
black
removes that wound from his stomach
Right.
and casts it on the floor.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I was thinking. Right, Leland's up above in the sky of the Black Lodge, and it does seem like he's in a trance. And you're right. He's able to take out maybe his pain and sorrow.
Yeah, that's what he said. Oh, yeah, and he comes out of his arm.
And
right?
he splatters blood
on the arm.
Right, so it does seem like it's something where I agree with you. If you look at the whole of Twin Peaks and Fire Walk with Me, I feel like both Laura and Cooper succeeded and failed. I feel like Cooper, you know, he basically was willing to give up his soul, and yet with the fear, he basically got trapped in the lodge. And so you think that, okay, he failed, but at the same time, he's there for Laura to comfort, because I think time doesn't matter in the Black Lodge. He's there to comfort her, and he's actually the protector. And then we have Laura, who she takes the ring. I mean, the ring's a whole other thing that we can talk about forever. But like the idea of the ring that
I'll address that briefly in my closing
okay, you're doing
statement.
It's complicated, right? But she takes the ring, which seems to me to be almost like a suicide, or she's basically giving in. And so in some ways she's failed, but I don't know how she gets out of such a mess like that. So it seems like she's failed, but then at the end to have her happy and the white light and the angel, it seems like she's at peace and she has succeeded. So it's interesting to see both characters fail and succeed. What do you have to say about that, Joel?
So that brings me to the final point, which is, I said, you know, I talked about how Twin Peaks, how Fire Walk with Me works as a standalone film. I talked how it works as a subversion of the movie, but it also works as a fulfillment and a completion of the narrative. And the conclusions I came to are basically by looking at the whole film and actually trying to figure out what's going on, like almost intuitively, not like let's sit here and analyze and sort of intellectually pick it, but like what feels like it's happening when you watch it. What are you kind of going through? What are the things that are happening that are almost like you almost don't pay attention to them, but they impact you somehow? So for me, one of the big clues was reading John's theory. He comes to different conclusions than I do about the ring and Mike's involvement and what it means when Laura takes it. But what he drew me to certain conclusions because he sort of pointed out things that I overlooked. So the big one was Donna and Renette. If you look at them in the movie, they're obviously real literal characters, but they also serve a symbolic function, which is Donna is Laura's good side and Renette is her bad side. Or at least what she thinks of as her good and bad side. and the two characters meet in the Pink Room. Literally, there's a shot of Donna, and she's drugged, and she sees Laura take her shirt off, and she's shocked, and she steps back, and she starts swooning, and the camera swoons, and it bleeds into him. Before you can even see her face, the subtitle pops up, and it says, Ronette Pulaski, and Ronette comes out of the haze and embraces Laura, and Laura says, Ronette, I haven't... So it's almost like you're watching Donna turn into Ronette in that scene, which is the good Laura turning into, quote-unquote, the bad Laura in that scene. I don't think he's a dualist in the sense of saying there's good and there's bad, and they're totally separate, and you have to defeat the bad, and then good wins. I think he sees it as, and this is a much larger discussion, but because he's essentially a Hindu, that's where the beliefs of transcendental meditation come from. They come from sort of non-dualist tradition, where the idea is that the universe is actually... and he terms this as sort of a quasi-scientific term they use a lot with TM, which is the unified field. Everything is part of this great one, sort of the Brahman, the oversoul, basically. So I think what the way that the good and bad is phrased in that, bad is, what bad means is it's or evil or what have you. The darkness, it's actually just not seeing that big picture. It's not realizing that the darkness is and the light go together. So it's only realizing that sort of a part of your personality, a part of your reality, and not the greater reality that it's a part of. So I just want to sort of preface that, because I think sometimes we talk about good Laura, bad Laura, good Dale, bad Dale. And the point isn't to defeat and destroy bad Dale or bad Laura. It's to integrate and to realize that they're all part of the full picture. So to go back to that point, she hasn't realized that. She has Laura, she has Donna as her projected good side, Ronette as her projected bad side, and the film keeps drawing them together. Like I said, that scene where Leland sees Donna and Laura on the couch, and then he sees Donna and Ronette, and and Ronette is also the one who calls out, "Oh, look at Donna. Is that Donna Hayward?" and laughs, basically. She's being, groped by this man, and she's like half conscious. And so the film keeps drawing them together. Now, what happens in the Donna storyline? Well, what happens is pretty clear. It's because Donna, at a certain point, exits the film. Her story has sort of been resolved in a sense. She served a narrative purpose, which was Laura needed to protect somebody, to rescue them, to show that she still has that capability within herself of being compassionate. And in being compassionate, because Donna is symbolic of her good side, being compassionate to herself.
Yeah.
Allowing her, looking at herself and saying, I'm not destroyed. There's still something, there's still a human being in there that hasn't been destroyed yet. And the way that that's shown in the film is when she sees Ronette, or Donna, basically about to be raped, and she leaps up from you see a blue flickering light, bluish, whitish flickering light in the Pink Room, and she helps drug Donna too. If you look, it's very clear. She not only sees but encourages the guy to drug Donna. So she's complicit in this. She sees what's happening, and she leaps up and she runs towards Donna and saves her, takes her home, and that's sort of the conclusion of the Donna arc. So that's the good side. Now, what about Ronette? What happens with Ronette? Well, Ronette is right there at the end. She's the one who's taken to the train car with Laura. And you actually see a repeat of exactly what happened in the Pink Room. You see a blue and white flashing light.
Yeah.
You see the friend in despair, and you see Laura looking at the friend. And then what happens in the film? The angel comes into the train
angel.
car.
Yeah.
And that, to me, let's look at the situation. Laura's hands are tied. She's facing a much more dire situation where she's actually trapped in a train car with nobody around to help her, and her own father tormenting them. So she's even more helpless than she was in the Pink Room. So she can't rescue Ronette physically the way she rescued Donna physically. What she can do, and what the film has led us to believe any character in Twin Peaks, particularly the ones who have that aptitude, Leland, Cooper, maybe Chet Desmond, certainly Laura, who have that spiritual aptitude, is they can call upon the spirit world subconsciously. This isn't Laura saying, I summon the angel. But because she's feeling that compassion, you see her weeping as she looks at her friend and wanting to help her, not even thinking about her own situation, but thinking, what can I do to help that person? What she's going to die because of me. It's something. She feels that compassion for Ronette, and that's when the angel appears. And so I really believe wholeheartedly, and I don't know that I would say Lynch intended this, and I still believe it wholeheartedly, that Laura is responsible for the angel appearing in the train car, and that's her redemption for several reasons. One, because it shows compassion for another person who she's rescuing at the expense of herself, because the angel doesn't appear for her; it appears for her friend. And it's also important to stress. People say, "Well, no, the angel's showing up because Rinette prayed." Well, I don't think so. If you listen to her prayer, it's completely self-abusing. It's saying, "I'm a horrible person." I can't remember her exact words, but she says, "I'm dirty, I'm wicked, I'm evil." In the universe of Lynch, in the universe of TwinPeaks, I don't think it's that kind of fundamentalist ethos where I'm a dirty, horrible person, wash me clean, I'm filthy. And not even because she's hurt other people, just because she's done things that, I mean, honestly, just because she's done things that society views as being immoral, you know, being a prostitute, doing drugs. They haven't shown Rinette to be some awful, other than, I suppose, the moment where she's like sort of laughing at Donna, you know, but for the most part, they haven't shown her to be like, in fact, they actually show her trying to help Laura when Jacques and Leo are assaulting them in the cabin, and she jumps up and Leo pulls back. So we know, you know, she shouldn't have to pray that way.
Right.
And I think in the world of Lynch, where there is that sort of karmic aspect to it, and it's not so much somebody punishing you, but you punishing yourself, I don't think that's the type of prayer that would be answered by an angel. I think an angel would respond to somebody else. I don't know if prayer is the right word, but somebody else being compassionate and wanting to help you. I think other people summon angels for you. And in fact, I think the angel at the end of the film is summoned by Cooper for Laura. So I think that's a repeat of that. So there's that aspect. There's also the symbolic aspect, which is Rinette is depicted as being Laura, the projection, the manifestation of her bad side. So this is Laura saying to her own, she's already recognized her own good side, but now she's saying my bad side deserves, quote unquote, bad side, the side that I view as dirty and corrupt and evil. That deserves compassion too. And that's her saying that is basically her making peace, in a sense, with herself. And not accepting the thesis of Bob, which is, you know, you are a dirty, awful person, and you deserve to have me inside of you. So there's those two aspects, and then there's also a third aspect, which is most likely Leland brought Rinette into the train car, so that they could kill her. So specifically, so that Laura could kill her. Because if you think about it, there's no reason for Rinette to be there, and Leland doesn't seem like he's about to kill Laura. He's torturing her. Him and Bob are torturing her. They're taunting her. Bob wants to possess her. At no point until the end of that scene does he actually want to kill her. It's all about, you're going to accept me. That's the end game. He doesn't care. He cares less about killing her. In fact, that ends up being a huge disappointment for him. He lost the chance to, you know, have this great prize that he wanted. So for him, the goal is this. Now, if you think about it, why is Rinette there? And somebody, you know, I heard this on podcast recently, so full attribution where it's due, but somebody kind of pointed this out. It wasn't just me. A lot of people have kind of come to this conclusion that Rinette was brought there because Leland needed somebody to sacrifice, basically. And or I should say Bob, because this is more the metaphysical aspect of it. They needed a victim for Laura, just like, you know, Leland confirms Bob's presence within him by killing people, and you know, kind of that's his point. Who knows what his point of no return was as a kid? Maybe it really came later. Maybe Teresa was really the point of no return for him, and he had struggled for 40 years with Bob. Or maybe, I mean, actually, I know the abusing his daughter was that point, I'm sure. And that came much earlier. So the idea is that Rinette's there, Laura's going to kill her, and then that's it. Now she's really, from now on, she's complicit. She's covering things up. Somebody came up with an interesting theory, not to get too far off track, but what if, you know, in an alternate reality where Laura does do that, Leland is then pinned with the crime, and, his poor daughter, she didn't. Meanwhile, now Laura is also, the Bob gene has been passed on, basically. So there's all of that, but instead, what happens? No, she doesn't summon the evil spirit Bob to kill Rinette. She summons the angel to rescue her, to untie her. Now, there's still some ambiguity in there because there's a look Laura gives Rinette that's, to me, and then there's all kinds of interpretation. It looks like malice to me. So it's possible the evil is kind of coming forth again, and that's when Leland walks over and knocks her in the head and knocks her out of the train car. But it's kind of too late at that point. The fact that she untied Rinette, got that train car open, That works on so many levels. It works for all the reasons I just said. It also works because throughout the movie, there's this motif of doors opening and closing, basically allowing access to another spiritual realm. And that's what happens in this case. So when she got that open door picture on the wall, that allowed her to travel to the Red Room. There's no Bob in this Red Room. It's just Mike, or it's just a little man who's obviously connected to Mike somehow, and Cooper and the ring. And Cooper telling her not to take the ring, I don't have, there's obviously all kinds of conclusions you could draw out of this, but I don't have that much faith in Cooper's advice about the ring. I think he's wrong because at that point, he's kind of been proven wrong on the show. You know, he doesn't know how to face his shadow self. He has that fear. Fear and love open the doors, right? That's what Major Briggs said.
Right.
So he has that fear. I think it's a good thing that Laura takes it. I think Cooper's wrong, and I think it's pretty much a total positive, even more than John Thorne does, but we'll save that for another discussion.
Well, thank you, Joel. Thanks very much for coming on the show. And I definitely recommend people check out your Journey Through Twin Peaks video essays. They're excellent.
You know, obviously, I hope you enjoy all the Journey videos, but the one, it's my favorite chapter, and it's the one directly dealing with what we talked about in probably a more lucid way than I could, you know, convey in talking over the phone. But it's chapter 25. It's called She Would Die for Love, which is the actual name of the theme music to Fire Walk With Me.
Oh, nice.
And the lyrics are completely pertinent to this idea of what Laura did and why she did it and why she's defeats Bob in the end.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for being on today's show. It was a jam-packed show filled with awesome theories, awesome people, and... oh boy, man, I'm exhausted. It's like a marathon, Ben.
Have you gotten enough of Fire Walk With Me yet?
I don't think I ever could.
Yeah.
I think I really looking forward to rewatching it.
Yeah.
But I feel like I need to rewatch the show and watch it in order. A part of me feels like I have to do it this way. And I'm finishing John Thorne's book. I want to read Lynch on Lynch, and then I'm going to dive back into the show, which will give me enough time, almost lead into season 3.
Yes, I'm going to do the same thing. I definitely will be rewatching the show as well. And you know, if you took your time and you savored it, a year from now, really in August, it'll be 25 years since Fire Walk With Me next year. So 2017 will be the 25th anniversary of Fire Walk With Me. So you could take your time, take a year, and enjoy it. And we should probably cover it again and talk about it next year.
I totally agree. I think there'll be more theories and thoughts, definitely, that will be well worth revisiting. Also, with Mark Frost's his book coming out later on this year.
Yeah.
It was announced in October, and I read what was it about.
You did?
I did.
Okay.
And this could tie into Fire Walk With Me. This is going to tie into everything. This is going to be very cool.
It'll be exciting,
I'm really excited to read this book. So
we're not completely done with Fire Walk With Me. We got one more part 3
of the trilogy.
Next week we'll be talking about the missing pieces, kind of the deleted scenes of Fire Walk With Me, which I waited over 20 years to see.
I waited over 2 weeks to see.
Boy, I don't know how you were able to hold up.
I don't know. It was rough 2 weeks, Ben.
We'll have to get into it next week, but that's too funny.
Yeah. So next week, missing pieces. So that would be the final part of the trilogy. And you can find us on Facebook. We've been getting a lot of Facebook traffic.
Awesome.
We are over 200 likes.
Congratulations, Brian. That's awesome.
Yeah, I know. 200 likes on Facebook is tough nowadays. Yeah. I feel like the younger generation isn't on the Facebook anymore. They're on the Instagrams and the Snapchats and the Twitters, and us old people are just stuck on Facebook because that's where we are. I don't want to change. But please keep on liking us on Facebook. And I'm doing a lot with our Reddit page. Well, we're on the Reddit Twin Peaks page. I'm going to post a new topic every week. I haven't decided what this week's going to be. Right now, the Star Wars one is up there. I I had a great conversation with tons of people about that.
I'm going to DUGPA. I'm going to their forums, and I've been posting there. Of course, always letting people know the new shows, but also doing the same thing where I'm trying to post some things, theories, or things that I've thought about to share and get some conversations going.
Yeah, cool.
One of the new ones is I still think that Mike the Spirit is an owl. We know that
that's
Bob,
a good one to bring
up. We know
up.
that Bob is an owl. But I would think then that all the spirits are owls, and I see what people think about that.
Yeah, I think that's worth to see what other people think. So that's cool. So check us out on those platforms, getting discussions going. You can email us at TwinPeaksUnwrapped@gmail.com. And Ben, he's taking care of the Twitter. We're on Twin Peaks Unwrapped on Twitter. And subscribe to us on iTunes. It's free, and you'll never have to think about us. When's the new episode will come out? It will always be there.
But we're out every Wednesday. We've never missed an episode. I mean, I never missed a week.
Yeah.
We've been doing this straight for a year, and so
it's pretty impressive.
Impressive.
I'm
waiting for my gold star here. I want to be like a kid and say perfect attendance.
Actually, every year without missing a show, we get a gold star.
There you go.
The year star.
There you go. I'll take that.
Yeah.
So all right, we'll be back next week
for part 3 of Fire Walk with Me.
Now her hands are tied. But Laura sees her friend's tears. She hears her cries for help. At the end of the movie, Rinette looks dead. Only the full context of the series tells us that she survives. And because of Lynch's last-minute revisions to the final episode, we even know that she recovers. But how does she escape the train car? And how does Laura finally defeat Bob? Bob cannot possess Laura, and Leland cannot control her, only because she takes the ring. Laura is able to take this ring only because Rinette opens the train car door. Rinette opens this door only because her hands are untied. I believe that Laura Palmer has brought this angel into the train car to save Rinette. Whether or not she realizes this, Laura's love is stronger than her fear. Superficially, she will die for this. Fundamentally, she is freeing herself.